You ready?
Huh?
You ready?
Yeah, you're
All right.
And not to do that ever again.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Judicial Proceedings Committee. Today is Wednesday, January 24th, 2024. We have not 7 bills on the docket. We're going to start off with Senator Ellis with Senate Bill 157. Then we'll move to Senate Bill 48, Senate Bill 102, Senate Bill 7, Senate Bill 26, Senate Bill 166, and we'll end up with Senator Muse with Senate Bill 190. Senator Ellis, the floor is yours. Welcome, Senate Bill 157.
Thank you, Chair Smith, Vice Chair Walt Stryker, members of the Judicial Proceedings Committee. I'm Senator Arthur Ellis from District 28, Charles County. I'm here to present Senate Bill 157, Domesticated Animals, Penalties for Abandonment and Microchip Requirements for Dogs. So a little backstory why this bill is before you. I live in the country area of Charles County, and it seems like a lot of folks in the suburban areas, when they can't afford their dogs, they take them to my community and drop them off and drive off. I've had so many strays in my yard year after year, especially when the economy turns. When things get expensive, high inflation, folks take their cute little dogs, all type of dogs, expensive dogs, adopted dogs, and just drop them off in the country. And it's obvious that I live in the country because when you drive 10 miles into Charles County, it's very suburban. You get into my area, whole bunch of trees, and it's like, oh, that's a country. That's where we're going to drop off these dogs. And it's a serious problem. And I feel for these canine. So this bill says, hey, don't drop off those precious pets, okay? Take them to a shelter to be adopted. Take care of the pets. And how can we do that? Other jurisdictions, states, I know Florida have a bill similar to this, a law, it's now a law, where folks are required to put a microchip in dogs that are transferred. That means go from one, say a pet store to an owner. Put a microchip in, register that animal, and keep track of that animal, and take care of that animal. And if you cannot afford to take care of the animal, just take them to the shelter and not to the country. You know, I had a long-term pet, been around in the family for 14 years, got very ill, and there was nothing else we could do. I didn't dump that dog off someplace. I lovingly took that dog to the shelter. His name was Popcorn, a Fleury Bichon Frise, and they accepted the dog and treated that dog with in a humane fashion. It's possible. We have infrastructure in the state to take care of that. And I want folks to understand that, you know, you can deal with your dogs in a very humane fashion. I know folks in some of the areas talk about all kind of problems. We care about people, we don't care about pets. If they're going through hard times, you understand them dumping their dog off. No, I mean, we don't allow them to do that to our precious children. So why do that to our precious pets? I mean, dogs are a part of the family. We hear about dogs saving people's lives. Just a couple of days ago, there was a news article of a dog with his master walking, and the master fell in, 55-year-old man fell into a semi-frozen pond. And that dog was able to carry a life vest from the rescuers to the master. They're precious, they're part of the family, they're smart, they're loving, and we need to treat them in a similar fashion. So with that said, Chair of the Committee, I ask for a favorable report on Senate Bill 157.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Senator. Questions from the committee? I know you have one witness, Mr. Linkins. Come on up, sir. If there are no questions for the senator, we'll hear from. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. Senator Carter has a question.
So thanks, thanks, Mr. Chair. So to my understanding, Senator Ellis, the bill would just, this is only about transfer. So you transfer ownership and you say you can't abandon an animal. One of the concerns I have with that is that from all of the intel I've received, when people are evicted or otherwise ousted from their home, whether it's rental or a mortgage issue, oftentimes they have no choice but to be on the street, and if they get put into a shelter or something, they aren't able to take their animal. So there could be situations where the animal is apparently abandoned, but no real desire on the part of the owner, but no real choice. So what then? Just go to court and work it out, or?
Oh,
would you-
yeah, thank you. That's an excellent question, Senator Carter. So the key is we know those stressors happen. And for furry, fluffy pets who cannot speak, we don't need to add more stress throughout our ecosystem. So, I mean, every shelter I know, they will accept a pet that you take to them that I cannot take care of. And so a little consideration that we understand folks going through, and the intent of this bill is not to put fines on people and penalties. Just say, hey, awareness, please, you're responsible for your pet. That's why the microchip is there. People are smart. They know there's a microchip. We can trace this dog back to the owner. Let me not do that. Let me take a 30-minute break and carry that dog to the shelter, and they will take them in.
This shelter wasn't, this is right, even hotels, every place allows animals now, but what if it's not that? It could be grandma's house, like I'm kicked on the street and grandma's like, you can come and your kids, but I'm not taking those animals. I mean, there could be situations, is my point, where someone doesn't want to give up their pet, but they have to.
Right. And, take the pet in all those situations, take the pet to the shelter and say, hey, we're working on transitional homes. I'll probably back in 3 weeks, 4 weeks to reclaim my pet. And so to just kind of go the extra step of considering that part of the family, that furry animal, and life happens. We know life happens. But at the same time, I know it was very sad for my children when they were young for us to turn away some of these cute pets that showed up. But after I adopted the first one that showed up, it's like, we just can't keep adopting these animals and take them in. So I think we could offer that consideration when folks are going through periods of stress, to let them think about the dogs and that spread that stress out.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you have any data about how many dogs or how many animals you think this would cover statewide?
So are you referring to the population of pets
Yeah,
that are transferred each year?
I'm just trying to identify the problem of people improperly disposing their dogs. That's where you started off.
Correct.
So I
Yes.
just didn't know about, was that 25, 2,500,
Yeah.
500?
Anecdotally, from my neighborhood, it's probably 25 to 30 dogs per year. But I don't have that number. I'll do some research and I'll get back to you, Senator.
Yeah,
with that.
I just didn't know if there was a, and then I see here in the fiscal note, it says that the bill also increases from $100 to $1,000 the maximum fine that authorizes imprisonment for up to 90 days or both. So is that something that has to, I'm not sure we need to be incarcerating these people.
Well, of course not. That's not the goal. It's to let people know this is a serious issue. And it's just like speeding down the street. There are penalties for folks who go above certain limits, right? Just reckless and endangerment. So the intention is not to incarcerate drivers, but to let people know that there's a level of behavior that will not be tolerated. And folks generally stay within the bounds of safety.
Cool. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How much does it cost to have a microchip implanted in?
Okay, I do have that data, around $10 per dog.
$10. If you take a dog to a vet for $10, he's going to implant the microchip in a dog?
I've seen that number, yes, sir, $10.
Wow. Do they sedate the dog before they
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Do they sedate the dog before they implant the chip?
I'm not sure about their veterinary technique, but I heard it's a very simple, fast process for a trained veterinarian, and not just veterinarian, but the veterinarian can delegate, and they often do delegate these different procedures to trained individuals in their office, whether it's
Yes.
a veterinary tech or any other person.
If somebody wanted to implant a microchip in me, I think I would want some sedation.
Yeah. That's where we'll draw the line, Senator. And, exempt individuals from any potential microchipping at the vet.
And then secondly, in a more serious vein, there's testimony here from the Humane Society that for decades, states and municipalities have mandated dogs be licensed. And the state compliance rates for that peak at about 20%. Don't you think that if this were enacted, you'd have a hard time getting dog owners to comply with microchipping their dogs?
That's an excellent question, Senator. So this bill does not require current dog owners to microchip their dogs. My dogs will be microchipped just on the transfer of dogs. So it'll be a seamless process.
Well, most people buy their dogs as puppies.
Correct.
Or from somebody. So whoever the somebody is who's selling the dog would be required under this to microchip the dog.
The onus is on the seller or the person who does the transferor, not the transferee.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. Relative to an issue that was brought up, I realize that this is a serious problem. And I am concerned about the imprisonment for up to 90 days, et cetera, et cetera. Would you be, and you can tell me today or whenever you can talk, if you would be amenable to amending that out, where there would be no jail time, even if you had a harsher.
Yeah. And just talking to a lot of, thank you for that question. I'll be willing to take that out. I think with listening to the questions now, and when the key is to get the chips in the dog.
Right.
And so we get the chips in the dog, everyone will know that this dog is traceable. And so they're responsible for that dog. So I will definitely be able
Okay.
to live
We'll
with
talk about
that
that.
the minute that sentence.
Thank you,
out.
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, seeing no further questions from the committee, thank you very much, Senator. We have one more, you can, welcome to just take a seat, and while we have one more a witness in
Thank you,
favor
Mr.
of
Chair.
your bill. Mr. Likens, welcome.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm Bob Likens. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Pet Advocacy Network. We are the nation's largest trade association representing the responsible pet trade. Just wanted to come and speak very briefly in support of this bill. And our focus is more on the requirement that microchips be implemented whenever an animal is being transferred. The reason, and to answer your question, Senator, it's about the equivalent of an ear piercing. These are really small. It's just subcutaneous. You pick up the skin, you stick the little gun there and pull the trigger, and it's done. There's no sedation necessary. It's essentially a painless operation. This bill has the potential to do a lot of good with reuniting pets and their owners, with animal welfare. We just wanted to mention that it also has the potential to do a lot of good with regard to developing effective public policy. This provides an opportunity for the state to gather exactly the data that the senator was asking about. Right now, there is no good source of information for the animals that are coming into the state, particularly through the shelter and rescue system. If you add a requirement that the shelters and rescues retain and report the data on the source of these animals, then we have a better idea of whether these are abandoned animals, whether animals are coming into the state through the shelter system, whether these are domestic animals that are being turned over or abandoned. So it provides a unique opportunity to really get good information that can then shape good public policy. With regard to the other senator's question, right now, Maryland is not bad when it comes to allowing pets into shelters, into human shelters, into domestic abuse shelters or homeless shelters. That's something that we push very hard for, and we'd like to see more of, particularly in regard to the domestic violence side, because surveys have shown that people, particularly women, will not leave an abusive situation if it means leaving a pet behind that is then going to be abused. So, and we'd be happy to work with anyone who's interested in legislation for that. There are a lot of good models across the country to use on that.
Excellent.
But we are absolutely in support and would love to see it expanded further.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Questions from the committee? All right, seeing no further questions, thank you both very much. Thank you,
Thank you.
Senator. And that will conclude the hearing for Senate Bill 157. We'll now move on to Senator Kagan, who's joined us with Senate Bill 48. Senator, you have a panel, if you'd like to bring up your panel. Chief Jones and then Mr. Spiegel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, colleagues. For the record, I'm Cheryl Kagan, very proud to be the senator for Gaithersburg and Rockville. I think between the press and what we're hearing from our constituents too often, public safety is on everyone's mind. There's a perception that crime is up, that violence is up, and that our police officers are not providing adequate protection. One of the reasons for that is the ongoing crisis in hiring police officers. Without police officers, without sufficient numbers, we have officers who are given mandatory overtime. There is a great resignation. There are officers, lifelong officers, who are retiring or resigning. The job is hard, and we know that. So what's the solution? We have to expand the pool of prospects, and this bill will allow us to do that. I call this freedom to serve because it allows honorably discharged veterans who are legal permanent residents to apply to become police officers. Now, whether that's the state police, whether that's Metro Police, county, or the city of Gaithersburg, there are no guarantees. There's no mandate that these folks be hired. But if they are, they will bring ethnic and linguistic diversity to our increasingly diverse state. They will bring a level of training and experience. These are folks who have put their lives on the line for our nation. And some of them are willing to offer themselves up to put their lives on the line for our communities. There are some people who see downsides in this. I want to say again, there is no mandate. This is an option to apply. These are folks who have already proven themselves to be courageous. There is the fact that people who are not yet citizens would not be able to work with federal databases. And there are folks who have pointed that out. I just want to give you the numbers, colleagues, which is in the country, there are 94 US Marshals who have access to the database, the federal database, 94 humans out of over 708,000 full-time police officers in our country. It is a fraction of those who serve. There are also questions about January 6th and those who were deployed. We sent about 100 people on January 6th to serve. Again, a fraction, it's about 4% of our total police force in Maryland. And again, we have a lot of different police officers. I believe that we are blessed to have people who have served our country and for whom it is not even their country yet. They may want to become police citizens, American citizens. They may be in the process of it. And as you may remember, in 2019, we passed a narrow version of this bill of freedom to serve. The problem is that it's so narrow that there are many police departments who haven't been willing to take the risk. They don't want to hire someone, train someone, and then end up needing to fire them, invest in them, and then they need to leave. There are 13 other states that have passed laws like this, and many of them even more open. the state of West Virginia, which we don't think of as a progressive state, the state of West Virginia, you don't even have to be a veteran. You can just be, you can be a DACA person, you can be someone who is living in West Virginia, and you can apply to be a police officer. California, Washington State, Hawaii, Oklahoma, Tennessee, the range from left to right in our states, they have this capacity. Maryland does not. Just a couple more quick things, Mr. Chair. One is I want to recognize that the minority chiefs of Maryland are here with us today supporting this bill. If it's okay for us to ask the minority chiefs who serve, please stand so we know that you're here. Thank you. So we have representatives and we have testimony from some of them. And I thank you all for your service and for your support on this bill. I want to remind you all that in addition to the crisis in our police departments in terms of recruitment, the other crisis that we faced in Maryland was in our healthcare workers. And last year we enacted a bill that because Maryland was ranked 50th, dead last, in terms of waiting room times in emergency rooms. And because of that, at least in large part because of a shortage in staff, we allowed people who are not yet citizens to get healthcare licensure. We needed more nurses, more doctors, more veterinary assistants and all that in Maryland. And so there were young people who we educated K through 12 in our public schools. Then we gave them in-state tuition and they got their college training. They got their in-state education. And then it came time to start their career and we slammed the door in their face. Last year, we changed that to address our crisis in shortage of healthcare workers. I believe, colleagues, that we truly must offer a similar opportunity for our honorably discharged veterans to offer themselves up as police officers for chiefs to consider hiring them to address the extreme crisis. I'm grateful to have with me my chief, Montgomery County Police Chief Marcus Jones, and the head of the Maryland Military Coalition, because we are proposing to include the reservists, National Guard, so as to, again, further expand the those who can serve. So happy to take questions or happy to wait for my witnesses.
Let's go ahead and complete the panel testimony and then we'll take questions at the end.
Perfect.
Excellent. Thank you.
Jones. Thank you all for your attention, your interest. I urge a favorable report on this important public safety bill.
So good afternoon to the members of the Judiciary Committee. Thank you for considering my testimony regarding this proposed legislation. My name is Chief Marcus Jones, of the Chief of the Montgomery County Police Department. And I am pleased to be here to be testifying in favor of this bill, this Freedom to Serve Act. The Maryland Police Training and Standard Commissions, as you well know, determines the best practices regarding hiring qualifications for police officers. Over the decades, these requirements have evolved, reflecting societal and cultural norms, and many of them have been changing rapidly, as we all know. Law enforcement agencies can always adopt stricter hiring standards, but need to really expand the standards set by the Training Commission. Adding the provision of needing to be in the process of becoming a U.S. citizen excluded a percentage of non-citizens from applying. And this bill seeks to rectify such provision. Recruiting high-quality police candidates have become more difficult in recent years. There is well-documented data to support that there are fewer individuals in today's workforce, and this trend will not change in the coming years. Currently, the Montgomery County Police Department of Police is 150 officers short. 15% of our work of our department currently is eligible for retirement today. So I am saying to you that this is a crisis, and we need every advantage in in the ability to recruit good police officers. As we look at our candidates, we think those in the armed services who are non-citizens, but who are honorably discharged deserve an opportunity to serve in our community. So thank you.
All right, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, for the record, Jason Spiegel, President of the Maryland Military Coalition, an umbrella group representing 21 veterans groups and about 160,000 veterans throughout Maryland. We strongly support SB 48, the Freedom to Serve Act. There's been much discussion about the shortage of law enforcement officers, and this is an opportunity to leverage a group of applicants who, whether or not they have citizenship, have demonstrated a commitment to serve and put their lives on the line for their country and the community. Non-citizens who join the military undergo a rigorous U.S. government background investigation, including a criminal records check, national agency check, local records check, employment and education verification. Significantly, a non-citizen who wants to enlist must be a high school diploma graduate. A citizen who wants to enlist does not have to be a high school diploma graduate. They can have a GED or demonstrate they are working towards a GED. So in many ways, non-citizens have demonstrated their commitment to better themselves and education. Moreover, everybody who has served, regardless of specialty or branch, has performed law enforcement activities, performing guard duty, credentials check, crowd control. I was a military intelligence officer. I did all that stuff. Critically, Maryland needs law enforcement officers who speak foreign languages and have cultural sensitivity. Immigrants, by definition, will have that cultural sensitivity and the language skills. We think that including the Guard and Reserve is critical because they live in the communities where they might be willing to serve as a police officer. So they understand the neighborhood, and all National Guard, Maryland National Guard personnel were on duty after the death of Freddie Gray or on January 6th. So they have a vast experience to draw on. We urge a favorable report on the bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Spiegel, and thank you for your service. We're going to, Senator Folden was first, and we have Senator Muse, and then Senator James, did you have a question too? Oh, okay, got it. Sorry. Of course. Senator Folden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So thank you for bringing the bill forward. I don't know who wants to take the question. I can start with you, Senator, if you'd like to. So you speak about honorably discharged vets is who this bill would seek to make able to serve as law enforcement officials. Does that means obviously they're legal U.S. residents, green card holding?
They must be legal permanent residents. Yes, green card holding.
And are they already showing a path towards citizenship? Is there a requirement there?
That is current law, is that they have to have applied to become citizens. This would, again, open the door a little wider by removing that in the same way that 13 other
So
states have.
we're removing the requirement for path towards citizenship.
We are desperately in a crisis, and we need diverse, linguistically diverse people who have served our country, who have shown courage, who have been trained.
Well, I'm going to take all those as a compliment. Thank you. So you're, well, I'll move past that. I don't agree with removing the very requirement of a path towards citizenship. If there's a path towards citizenship, then that would seem almost reasonable to me that we would have that. The bigger issue for me is the federal databases. I don't know where you got your data on the 94 personnel that have access out of however many 100,000 you said. But are you familiar with the NCIC system?
I am, actually.
And is that a federal database?
Yes, it
And do you
is.
know how many law enforcement officers have access to that?
I don't. off the top
Every
of my
law
head.
enforcement officer has access to that.
Okay,
So that by
that's how
enough,
gun ownership, background checks are handled.
okay. My point being is that every sworn law enforcement officer in Maryland would have access to that information.
I can't speak to that. Chief, is that something you want to speak
Well, I
to?
would speak to it in the sense that they have access to look at information. They don't have access to do anything with the information.
How do we know what they would do with it, chief?
Well, as any sworn police officer is sworn, there are rules and policies that require them that any information that they receive from any law enforcement database, that information is protected. And there are rules that are responsible for that. So if anyone violates those rules, regardless of, again, as a police officer, the police departments have the ability to punish said officers and discipline them for utilizing. And in fact, officers have been charged federally for the misuse of federal databases. And those officers have been U.S. citizens. Even for my department, we've had those officers charged federally.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I'm a police officer in the state of Maryland, active. So I understand the rules.
Right.
We have a differing of opinion on how we're going to allow who to serve our communities that are the peacekeepers, the uphold the laws in our community, being citizens or non-citizens, because there's an opportunity there. And I know you guys in Montgomery County have this, where we have gang activity and we have people that are bilingual that even may have served, because there's people that are known to have gang activity, access or be part of gangs affiliations while serving in the military. I mean, we've all seen those. So giving someone this access to these databases that can then be shared and or not only that, but warrant data, warrant information, stuff like that, that is very critical to the safety of law enforcement, is absolutely at the crux of my concern on this, is because now you're allowing people that are non-citizens, not on a path to citizenship, and potentially sharing data or information that could result in the injury or harm of a law enforcement officer who is serving.
I understand that, Senator, and I would also share with this committee that I'm also concerned with individuals who are U.S. citizens, who are police officers in this country and in the state of Maryland, who could become radicalized and could also do the same thing with other illegal terrorist groups and the like.
Wow.
And that's a reality.
Well, this
right?
is not that hearing though, sir.
No, I understand that, but I utilize that as an analogy of, if we have to hire the best people and do our background.
It's not an appropriate response.
Yeah, it's going to create a little space here.
I could add just maybe a
I just want to create a little
concept.
space. Just want to say, all right,
Sorry.
we've got it. I understand the exchange is getting a little heated, but just want to create a little space. Let's continue on. Senator Fulton, do you have another?
Yep, I have one more question, and this one's for the chief. So, Chief, you're saying you have 150 officers that you're short currently.
That's correct.
Okay, and you have a 15% of your department that's able to retire, because
That's eligible to retire today.
right.
That's correct.
And what's the size of your department, sir?
We are authorized strength of 1,283 officers.
And you're at 1133?
Currently, and that number fluctuates frequently.
And of that, so you could have over 10% of your department if they chose to walk away.
That is correct.
And that was also on the heels of the 90s and when early 93, 94, when they passed that legislation for the increase in law enforcement. So a lot of those officers that went through large
Absolutely.
academies are what you're looking to lose.
Yes, sir.
And that's being suffered by law enforcement across the state.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. And then, yeah, I mean, Senator, I agree. I think I applaud your efforts. I don't know that this is a solution, but I applaud your efforts in trying to get more law enforcement. But the reality is we've attacked law enforcement and demonized them for the past 4 years. And now we're wondering why nobody wants to be a police officer anymore. That's the end of it. I mean, honestly, I told my son, don't be a police officer.
So your comment is thoughtful and appreciated, and I agree, which is why every time I walk past a police officer, I pause to say thank you. Thank you for your service. Whether or not they were veterans, they are serving our community, they're serving our state, they're putting their lives on the line, and it is a hard job. Accusations, oversight, it's a challenge. We need good people. Thank you, Senator Fulton.
And welcome to our committee. Just two questions. You mentioned that there were a number of states where this law has already been implemented. Tennessee, et cetera, et cetera. Any evidence of any abuse of or wrongdoing or anyone being charged who fit this description became a police officer.
Thank you. Are you done with?
I'm done with that first question, yes.
Thank you very much for I have to put on my glasses because the font is so small because the list is frankly fairly long. So I'm going to read first in alphabetical order the other states. So California, Colorado, Hawaii, Illinois, Louisiana, Maine, North Dakota, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Utah, Vermont, Washington, and West Virginia. And I can say that in at least 3 of those, Colorado, Vermont, and West Virginia, there is no citizenship requirement whatsoever. And in some of them, they just have to be legally authorized to work in the United States. They don't have to have served in the military. They don't have to be honorably discharged. So Illinois can be a legal permanent resident or a green card holder. Louisiana just must be legally authorized to work in the United States. North Dakota, legal permanent resident. Same with Oklahoma. Tennessee is the one that is similar. That is honorably discharged and a legal permanent resident, which is what we think is right. Plus, we add the National Guard and Reserve folks.
Thank you. And let me again say welcome, Chief, and welcome to all of our law enforcement who I see present here. Thank you for what you do. I understand, and I listened to both. My seatmate is a great colleague and then makes great points, and I understand your point as well. And in trying to put the two together, I think you're right. We take a risk every time we swear an officer in. The vast majority uphold the law, but we have absolutely no way of telling who will not uphold the law. And having said that, whether they are citizens or not, we are always taking a chance with that because there, of course, as you said, there's been evidence of those who swore to protect this state and country, et cetera, who have totally gone back on that, and it's going to happen. There's no way of extracting that minority from the vast majority who will uphold the law. And so you agree that we take a risk anyway, and this is the same, and it's no different than what we do with our own residents who become police officers.
I would agree, Senator. I think it's commonplace for, I think the most important piece for a chief of police in a hiring process is to make sure that, thorough background investigations are done on all candidates. You have done your due diligence, and most importantly, to hire the best people. And that's when we look at this, it's not just for the fact, that I'm 150 officers short. I can tell you that I refused many applicants and we've had enough applicants to fill the void that I currently have, but I will not go short on the standards of the hiring of Montgomery County Police because I stand strong and tall in our profession to make sure we hire who we believe in. You're right, it's not an exact science, that there are some that will fall through, that will fall into this trap of going down the wrong road and doing something illegal. But I think it's it's very important in our role as stewards of the responsibility the community has given us to make sure that we are hiring the very best people to protect our communities.
Okay, thank you both, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to commend the sponsor of this bill for bringing this bill and recognizing that we have a serious problem across the state, not just in a couple of police forces, but uniformly across the state with vacancies in the police forces. That said, I read with interest the testimony of the Maryland Chiefs of Police Association, the Maryland Sheriff's Association, supporting the bill with amendments. And I want to read one paragraph there and ask the police chief to respond to it, if you would, because it does cause some concern. Here's what it says. An officer who is not a U.S. citizen is limited to serving in only certain capacities, such as patrol or community resources officer, to name a couple. This individual would not be able to serve in capacities requiring a security clearance, involvement in FBI joint task forces, or being deputized as a U.S. Marshal. The requirement to obtain citizenship and have an application pending approval was included in past legislation to address MCPA and MSA's concern that without it, it could create two different classes of officers and standards to ensure workforce and personnel issues do not result. So my question to you, Chief, is are you concerned that in your department, that if this is passed, you're going to have to create two different standards of officers, classes of officers, one that can do anything and another that whose responsibilities would be limited to only certain things?
No, I'm not concerned about that because first and foremost, officers who, again, there is qualifications for some of the jobs that those chiefs in that letter, which it states. Every officer in the department is not qualified necessarily on its face just for those particular positions. Those positions may require the accessibility in regards to being a task force officer, as an example. But that doesn't mean that every officer on my department is eligible for that position because they may not meet the minimum qualifications in that particular position itself. So that is not a concern of mine. I think the reality would suggest that, you have officers, again, not only, would this open the door and get officers, just like, we would say that for you to be promoted. And I'll give an example. For my department, you have to have 60 college credits to join our department. But to be a sergeant, you have to have 120 college credits. So if you don't have 60 college credits, 120 college credits, you will not become a sergeant. Okay. I would say similarly in this case, if you were to bring someone on who did not have citizenship, and they therefore would know these are the requirements that would require you for that particular job. So that, again, that's why I would say I wouldn't have that concern because it's 2 points here, right? Well, the first point is in reality, if you want that particular position, then you would vie for a citizenship, just as someone who would want to be a sergeant would go get their 60 college remaining credits in order to be able to take that promotional test to become a sergeant.
Okay, so what you're saying is that right now there are differentiations among police officers in your department, and this might create additional differentiations, but we already have some, so you're used to dealing with that fact.
That is
And
correct.
you don't have two classes of officers. You have various officers who can do different things.
Different roles. That is
Gotcha.
correct.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know, Senator Kagan, if that's why you called me yesterday to talk about this bill. So I apologize for not getting back to you. I didn't realize you had a bill today. And I want to thank you also for bringing this bill. So I have two, I think everybody has an emotional side and a rational side. My emotional side almost feels offended that people don't want to be applying to be U.S. citizens and also, but want the incredible power and responsibility of enforcing the laws of the United States on everyone. So that's my emotional reaction. And I want to listen to my rational side too, because I know emotions are not always the right response. But here's what I'm going to ask with a little more understanding. If what my colleague Senator Folden mentioned, which is pervasive, that morale is down, people don't want to serve, people are retiring or retiring early, and we're struggling everywhere, even in my county, to get new recruits. Why doesn't that same, I have several questions, so here's my first. Why isn't that same dampening of enthusiasm? What a polite way to say that, because it's much worse than that, I really think. Why isn't that dampening of enthusiasm going to play the exact same role in the applicant pool that you'd like us to open up to? Why is this going to be of any help? And bear in mind when I ask that, I would like then, as a follow-up to that two-part question, how many more applicants do you believe you're going to get with this, right? I would think that for all the struggling we're doing here, all the debating we will continue to do, there ought to be a really good understanding and real data to say, guess what? This will fill the void, not symbolically, not for very few, but for all the heartburn we're going to have going back and forth on this bill. This is going to have a dramatic or even significant increase. So I'd like to know if anybody has studied this and how many people are getting turned away. I'll stop there. I have another one, but those two, my emotional, rational response to the dampening and how many more people.
Right. Let me start and then I'll toss it to my colleagues here. Thank you for the question, Senator. The power of being police officer was an interesting phrase because I think veterans, military troops have the power of being a soldier, and they're carrying a gun and they are waging war or fighting terrorism or defending our nation or our state already.
I don't want to
so-
interrupt, but I got to just tell you, I think people in combat, fighting enemies,
Yes.
and people policing our US citizens, even the president understands that you don't turn troops on citizens. So the police in this country have a very different role, I believe. But I understand the
I
power,
just
but
wanna-
you didn't understand how the power is connected to policing our US
Right.
citizens versus dealing with enemy combatants. I think there's a real difference.
Right. So why would this help the shortage and how can we guarantee that people are going to apply? So one of the important opportunities that this creates is a career path, a professional career path in a field where they're already trained, already confident, and already experienced. And so they come home, they've served our country, and do we want them to go and work at the gas station? Do we want them to go and do odd jobs and pick up jobs until this is a career path that can give them seniority, respect, a union job, a job that's visible and respected. So in terms of guarantees, I don't think there are any guarantees. Certainly this wouldn't cause any backsliding. And one of the questions is, how has it expanded? And some of that is going to be, are people going to hear about it? And I've talked to the chief actually about whether that's a marketing campaign. His recruiters can be out there and making sure that in the community, current police officers can be talking to their neighbors, their colleagues, folks who go to church with them, folks who are in the same PTA, whose kids go to the same school. And again, with the ethnic and linguistic lack of diversity that we have right now, we are less effective at protecting our neighbors, because community policing is more effective when I speak your language, when our kids are growing up together, when we pray together, when we serve together. You're going to whisper to me what's going on in your neighborhood in a way that they may not currently. So in terms of other states, again, red and blue, left and right, and they go back several years. This is not new legislation in several of these. And again, it is part of Tennessee goes back to 2015. So they've been doing this for 8 years as a way of trying to recruit. And it's an opportunity. Chief, what would you add?
I would also state that I think that, you have the opportunity to reach out to the military, which we already do. We go to military bases to their job career fairs when soldiers are getting ready to end their time of service. And they're now going to come into civilian life and they're looking for opportunities, and we do recruitment. In fact, we actually hire officers who have 3 years of military service and are honorably discharged, and therefore they don't have to meet the minimum 60 college credit requirement to actually get started on our, but it's a career path, right? And I think that's important. I would say, and I think it's fair to say, I wouldn't look at this bill to say it's going to be the panacea of hiring for Montgomery County. But I utilize that or any other police department across the state of Maryland. But what I would also state that there are issues that are hampering recruitment, that we are eliminating good quality candidates. And I'll give an example. The cannabis law that was passed by this General Assembly and put into law in July of this past year and the rules and the training commission that limits individuals who utilize cannabis also hamper our ability to recruit, because you're cannabis, and it's the same as utilizing alcohol, but yet there's no restriction from that standpoint of individuals who utilize alcohol and cannabis. So from that perspective, so I just see that we've got to look at changes in our hiring processes in order to get good candidates to join our department.
Just one last question. Just to clarify, I think what you're both, and I appreciate this, I do, but I don't think we have any data that just to clarify, I can't find a study right now that what this will do. Is that correct? The other states, there's no data that showed how many more applicants we might, remember, that's applicants, not people getting selected, but just applications. I'm surprised, actually. So I thought there would be. Let me ask you this, because I just don't understand this issue. Why is it that what is the requirement that you have a pending application? Why wouldn't every one of these people want to apply for citizenship? You want to be a police officer? That seems very American and USA and permanent. I'm just shocked that that's an impediment, or why these people would say, you know, I want to be a police officer, and they check every other box you have. They're just great. And then yet they go, no. If I have to be a current applicant for U.S. citizen, count me out, because you know what? I can't stand that requirement. Why is this such an impediment?
Well, is it not my understanding that they have to become a U.S. citizen?
No,
No.
they have to have a
Oh,
pending
right.
application.
Right.
So that's current law, is that they have to have a pending application. The
Yeah.
problem is there are a lot of reasons why they've just moved into Maryland. They don't have the residency requirement. They don't have the money, as this committee probably knows better than anyone. It's expensive and time consuming to go through the application process to become a citizen. Veterans, the standards are higher, and they are dismissed, rejected more often than non-veterans. And certainly we're not saying don't apply. We want you to become a citizen. We want to, but what we don't want is for that to prevent you from applying to be a police officer, for
But why
serving your
can't we
community,
meet all those.
and then for,
I don't mean to ever interrupt, but I just want a dialogue.
please.
Why can't we just say, as another part of this bill, let's subsidize the cost? But if it's that darn important, let's make everything easier for these applicants, as opposed to just eradicating what I can't believe is an impediment. But if it is an impediment truly, and it is cost or
And
some other,
time.
why don't we address that head on and say, in this bill, quite frankly, and say, look, here, because I hope you have the data on why they're not doing this, so that we can address that as well. That's, to me, would make me, my emotional and rational side come together.
Come
in
together.
Good karma. Anyway, you don't have to
Um,
answer all that now. Follow up with me, that I've asked a lot of questions.
It might be
So-
instructive to look at what the other states, the states that have removed this requirement, what their recruitment looks like, what the applicant pool looks like.
Yeah,
Maybe
I'd
looking
say-
at that, you could
Can't
have
believe
some
we
sort
don't
of
have that
deduction
data.
as to what it might look like here, but.
And we can see whether that's something we might be able
Yeah.
to find. I just, in closing, just a reminder, this bill has passed the House already. So we're looking to you all to move this forward, again, to address the crisis in our police forces so that we can protect our communities. And there are people who ask me, how does a non-citizen arrest a citizen? How would that work? So if there's a police officer in a uniform with a badge and a gun who is arresting you or giving you a speeding ticket, are you going to ask for their citizenship papers? You're going to respect them as a sworn police officer. With that, thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
You went there, so I gotta follow up.
Okay,
So I was gonna shut my mouth and just let things go. However,
I'll second that motion, Senator Bolden.
no,
No,
so
no,
you
no.
brought it up
Bring
because, citizenship is important. US citizenship is a privilege. It's not a right, right?
Agreed.
So, or I guess it is it is a right, actually, it's a right.
you're born
It's a
here.
right,
Yeah.
but it's also not something that's just given away, albeit some people might like to, more than others. what I'm saying is when someone is not a legal US citizen, exactly, I'm glad you brought it up. How is that person who is entrusted with more authority than anybody else in the state? Because they have the right to take away your freedom. They get to put handcuffs on you and take you away. That is a privilege that is not even given to the president. But we're going to have someone who's a non-legal or a non-US resident given and empowered with the authority to take away a US citizen's right to freedom.
So Senator Folden, you just said a non-legal US resident. That's actually inaccurate. We're
Okay.
talking, so these
I
are
corrected it.
legal permanent residents. They are here legally. They have served our country.
They're
They
not
have-
US citizens.
They are not yet US citizens.
And they're
That's
not
correct.
even, you want to take away a pathway to citizenship.
No, I'm not. I am taking this bill, not I, the bill proposes to remove it as a requirement before you
That's-
can even apply. That doesn't mean that they might not do it anyway, that
No,
they
you're
might not do
literally
it once they've
Answering my
started.
question, Senator. Like you're saying that the bill removes that there be a pathway to citizenship for hiring.
Okay, Chief, do you want to close?
It's
Okay,
removing the
I think we're good.
requirement. So that makes this person, a non-US citizen, able to arrest and take away the freedom of a US citizen. Is that correct?
Today, Senator, we still live in a democracy and there's a process and there is a judicial system and I trust that system.
Ma'am, I've worked in that judicial system
Yes.
for almost 30 years and I served this country
Bless
at the
you.
age of 17. And what I'm telling you is I don't want US citizens having their freedom taken away by someone that's not a legal US citizen or at least on a pathway to citizenship. And you're taking away the one thing that would almost be palatable by those that are on the fence. And that is that they're not even required to get to that point of citizenship. We had this same discussion last year. If you made it, they had a pathway to citizenship that they were going to get there within 5 years or whatever, at least people understand that they're moving in the direction to be US citizens. But we're giving them a huge responsibility and power against people that are actual US citizens. And I have problems with that.
I will just close, Senator Folden, with saying that the current law, the reason that we're here to propose amending current law is that because that sword of Damocles, because that requirement is hanging over folks, the law is not as effective as it should be. Because police departments are not going to take the risk when there is someone who could be a great candidate to be on their force, and then they would have to terminate them. And that is in our.
Can
current
one of
code.
these green card holders, one of these non-US citizens who serve in the service in the
Legal permanent
military,
resident,
can
honorably
they be
discharged.
an officer in the military? I know.
No.
I know
you
the
have to
answer.
be- you
I
have
just
to
wanted
be
to
a
know.
US citizen to be.
You can't be.
commissioned.
You can't be. Why? You can't lead US troops as an officer in combat as a non-US citizen.
Chief Jones talked about hierarchy. We have hierarchy in this body. We have hierarchy in most aspects of our nation and many fields, including in our police departments and in our military.
Appreciate it. I
This
think
would
we've
be
exhausted
Thank
this
you.
line of inquiry.
Thank you.
Senator McKay, go ahead.
It's true that we have hierarchy. And I'm at the bottom of the rung, but I have the ability to go as far as I want. So that's because I'm a member of this body, not because I want to be a member of this body, not that I was a really, really good Montgomery County resident for 18 years. It's that I am a member of this body. And I think that talks to the root of what is something that we could possibly work with to make palatable, but to just jettison is not the fair, but to alleviate that requirement really, really strikes to the root cause of why you're not having as many people. So when you're on the floor looking up, anyhow, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Senator McKay. The reason why I think Senator James's line of question was particularly important is because you know, you can be honorably discharged from the military, and then there could be a gap of time in which any number of things can happen before you apply to be a law enforcement officer. And so it's important to understand, how effective this recruitment measure would be. And I guess we could gain some semblance of that by looking at the other states that have passed it, because I'm supportive of the effort. But then I looked at some of the reasons why one would be denied citizenship anyway. I mean, so the most common reasons are having a criminal record, so I suppose you wouldn't be eligible. Failure to provide child support, potentially not eligible. Failure to pay taxes, potentially not eligible. Committing fraud on your citizenship application, I don't know. You failed to pass the citizenship test. Well, I read a recent article that said that, you know, 1/3 of Americans couldn't do that anyway. But so all the reasons that you would fail that citizenship test would probably preclude you from being a law enforcement officer anyway. And so I'm wondering really what gap we're closing if you fail to get that. So that's the only reason why I think that line of questioning is really compelling. And it would be, I think, revelatory if we were able to get some inkling as to what the other states, like the number that the other states, because if it's a lot, then maybe, like, you know, it's worth it. But the pool is actually not even, I mean, it's even smaller, because if you fail that citizenship test, then you're not going to be eligible to be a law enforcement officer anyway. And so we're really not opening the door to the larger pool that we may think we may be tapping into. I don't know that answer.
So there are reasons
yeah.
why people choose not to start the process. And I mentioned the time, I mentioned the money and all that. One of the stories that I heard, one of the anecdotes, was that there was someone who was set to inherit grandma's farm in the home country. And while grandma was still alive, he had to be a citizen of the home country. And so literally sort of would have been precluded from inheriting something that would help him support his family here. If he changed the citizenship. So there are personal examples that make sense and that people are rational. I think most folks, if they were serving our nation, even though they weren't citizens of our country, and wanted to serve our community, I would think they would want to earn the privilege of becoming American citizens. But there are reasons why they don't. And again, until we expand this a bit, we're not going to diversify and address our shortage, our crisis level shortage.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you, Senator.
Thank
for
you,
the
Mr. Chair.
chief.
Thank you, colleagues, for the thoughtful questions. Appreciate
you.
your time.
Now, just one data point for the chief. You said Montgomery County is about 150 officers short.
Yes, sir.
And then what was our last graduating academy class?
It was, I believe it was 23, sir.
23.
Right.
What is it normally, like in prime time? What was it?
In the good years, we would have classes that were between 40 and 50.
Wow.
Right.
Okay. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all. Thank you, Senator. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Mr. Spiegel, thank you. Good to see you.
Seeing you.
All right. I don't see anyone else signed up in opposition. We had some written opposition, but nothing in person. So with that, that'll conclude the hearing for Senate Bill 48. We'll now move on to Senator Carrozza. Senator Carrozza here. Here you go. With Senate Bill 102. Senator Carrozza, you have a panel. Would
I have
you like
two witnesses if they could.
Excellent. Yeah, please come on up.
Jeannie come. Good afternoon. For the record, I'm Senator Mary Beth Carrozza, representing Maryland's Coast, Worcester, Wycomico, and Somerset counties. And thank you, Mr. Chair and Vice Chair and members of the distinguished Senate Judicial Proceedings Committee for allowing me to present Senate Bill 102, Public Safety Handgun Permits, Expiration and Renewal Periods for Retired Law Enforcement Officers. This legislation would extend the expiration and renewal periods of handgun carry permits for law enforcement officers who retired in good standing. Currently, permits are valid for a 2-year period after the initial issue date and are valid for 3-year periods thereafter. Under this legislation, permits for retired officers in good standing would be valid for 5 years after the initial issue date and would be renewed every 5 years thereafter. Colleagues, you might recall that I introduced similar legislation last session, but have tightened it up during the interim. by reducing last year's proposed 7-year renewal period to the 5-year proposed 5-year renewal period. And as noted in the Maryland Trooper Association testimony, other states follow the 5-year expiration process, including neighboring states, Delaware, Pennsylvania, and Virginia. Mr. Chair, this is a narrowly focused bill that improves the process for handgun renewal for retired law enforcement officers, and it recognizes their years of service, good standing, and training. A fine example of this is retired Maryland State Police Sergeant Joe Saunders, who lives in Ocean City. You'll see his testimony in your packet. He served for 25 years and, like all law enforcement, was properly trained in the use of a handgun before he was even allowed to carry his service weapon, and he continued to undergo annual training throughout his years of service. Additionally, this legislation would give the Maryland State Police more time to focus on priority matters rather than processing applications from retired law enforcement officers, freeing up valuable and limited resources to support investigations and other forms of police work. I think my colleagues will agree that our retired officers have served Maryland with integrity, and many continue their service in their communities with volunteer work or returning to work. In Ocean Pines, we have a fair amount of Maryland law enforcement officers who have decided to retire there, and I can attest to the tremendous contributions they make. We want to keep our retired law enforcement here in Maryland, and this reasonable extension of the renewal period is a straightforward way to show our appreciation for their past law enforcement service. Several organizations have expressed support for this legislation: the Fraternal Order of Police, the Maryland Troopers Association, the Maryland State Police Alumni Association. You will hear from Rick Norman. I'm excited about our witnesses. He's been working up here in Annapolis since 1995 in some capacity. And Jeannie Mastronardi is going to testify from the Maryland State Police Alumni Association. And I met Jeannie when you came down for your association conference in Ocean City. And I really appreciated having the opportunity to hear about your experiences and your support for the bill. Jeannie is the former acting commander of the Maryland State Police Barrack in Annapolis. So I appreciate if my witnesses could testify before questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Hello, all. Senators of the Judicial Proceedings Committee, representatives and guests. My name is Sarah Mastronardi. I'm a retired first sergeant and former acting commander of the Annapolis Barrack with the Maryland State Police. I'm currently representing the State Police Alumni Association, where I serve as their president. This is an uncompensated position. I have over 30 years of law enforcement experience, as I started with the department in the late 1970s. I am honored to speak with you all today on the subject matter, Senate Bill 102, Retired Law Enforcement Handgun Permits. Since my retirement, I was afforded the opportunity to apply for a handgun permit as a retired police officer in good standing. Good standing means the officer has retired from the department with no adverse charges or disciplinary action that has received positive evaluation. In that case, the retiree receives a retirement badge, an identification card to confirm their service with the department. The first permit after retirement expires after 2 years. Then the applicant has to reapply at least 60 days before its expiration. At no time can you carry the firearm or permit after expiration. There was a period of consideration during COVID. Subsequently, after the first permit, subsequent permits will expire every 3 years. The applicant must reapply in all circumstances. It is our request that the 3-year expiration be extended to a reasonable time, no less than 5 years moving forward. During my tenure with the Maryland State Police, I served in the handgun permit section for 5 years. And the abundant amount of initial and renewal applications are enormous. Many times I felt like I was a hamster on a wheel. The workload for the investigators to handle renewal applications takes valuable time away from investigations. Should you be willing to extend the period for our law-abiding retirees, this would lessen the workload for the department of that unit, decreasing the backload of investigations, lessening the overtime funds needed to conduct those investigations.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, members of the Judicial Proceedings Committee. My name is Richard Norman. I'm a retired captain with Maryland State Police. Spent 28 years in the state police, 10 years with the Office of Administrative Hearings, 2 years as an auditor for the state police, and now I'm the executive director for the Maryland Trooper Association. To say I've been involved with law enforcement in 1977 is basically what I've been doing. We represent 2,600 members. Of their members, 1,500 of them are retirees. And we just don't go away. 2 stories I could tell you real quick. A friend of mine that was in my academy class 3 years ago came upon a burning car, had to stop and help the citizens. One of the citizens were unconscious. He had to break a window with an extraction tool that he bought from our office, the Maryland Trooper Association, drug 2 people out of the car. He's got a handgun permit, and it'd be nice to be able to say, instead of 3 years, why don't we give you 5 years? Sergeant Phillips was shot last year on the Eastern Shore 3 times. Bulletproof vest saved his life. The culprits ran into a construction area, and they were reported to be in that area. And a retired Maryland State Trooper who was monitoring the situation and building houses went to that area and actually found these people. Another one. It's just a nice gesture to say instead of 3 years, 5 years. And one of the things that you may be concerned about is there any checks and balances? Well, there is. If you look at Senate Bill 824 last year, the Maryland State Police must do a background check on everyone that has a handgun permit annually. So you're just not giving a handgun permit to a trooper 3 years, or a law enforcement officer 3 years or 5 years without any checks. So there is a check annually. And under the RAP back program through the federal government, if a former law enforcement officer is arrested, and I believe this is true, and they are fingerprinted for any criminal offense, the Maryland State Police is notified immediately. So there's always checks and there's always balances out there. It just don't give a permit and let the person go away. It's a cost savings that was talked about by Senator Carrozza, and I think it would be a good gesture, like other states, to move it from 3 to 5 years. So we would ask for a favorable decision from this committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you both very much, and thank you, Senator. Questions from the committee? All right. So, if you have a question, go ahead. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. This is
Thank you,
great.
Mr. Chair. Thank you,
Mr. Chairman. We do have a one more favorable with amendments. Mr. Pennick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mark Bennett, President of Maryland Shall Issue. Everything what you just heard, I agree with, and applies equally to every other permit holder. The John Lott has surveys the number of permits in every state every year. As of August 23rd, there were almost 159,000 permits in Maryland. Now, most of those are initial permits because prior to Bruin, there were only 12,000 permits in Maryland. So what you have here is going to be an onslaught of renewals in 2 years. That is going to stretch the Maryland State Police very thin. I'd rather have them do a competent, thorough investigation of permits less often and do it right than have them stressed to get their resources to get it done within the 90 days that they are allocated under existing Maryland law. So there is absolutely no reason that this state can't follow most every other state in the union and allow for 5-year renewals. Maryland is behind Virginia, which is 5 years, Pennsylvania, which is 5 years, Delaware, which is 3 years, 5 years. Most states in the country are at least 5 years. Florida is 7 years. So with the wrap-back system, with the constant training that's required, the state police will run the background check every year for sure. The wrap-back system will tell you if a permit holder is arrested at any time, and the state police are fully empowered to revoke that at any time. But let's allocate resources sensibly. The Maryland State Police are short of people. Those people need to be doing these background checks sensibly. Not every 2 years, not every 3 years. There's no downside to this, a lot of savings associated with it, not only for the police, but also for individuals as well. I ask for a favorable report with this amendment.
I'm sorry, what was the amendment?
The amendment was to extend the 5 years to every permit holder.
Oh, every permit holder. Okay, got it. Okay.
That's the only amendment.
Well, that may be a bridge too far, sir, but
well,
I see I know that. Well, I'm not letting that one jump out. All right. Senator James.
Yes, hi. To either you or the sponsor, you just mentioned all these states. Are we an outlier in not only it being 3 years versus 5, but for police or retired law enforcement, however the bill's structured, are we an outlier on the 3 versus 5 for permit holders?
Oh, yes.
So
absolutely.
is there any state?
Well, I think there's 2 states that come to mind. New Jersey and California have 2 years.
2 of my heroes.
Okay, right. So the way outliers with respect to every other state. There's 28 states in the union that have no permit requirement at all to carry concealed. I mean, those obviously don't expire at all.
Right, but for those that do.
The typical is 5 years. I have some of the citations in my written testimony as to particular states. New York is 5 years. And honestly, if New York can do it, there's absolutely no reason Maryland can't do it. Of all states in the country who are more anti-gun than any other, New York is right at the top.
And then if I could just follow up between you or the sponsor, there was a witness, and I thought this was very helpful from my analysis. He said, look, we may not do the full background check, but annually, as I understand the way we currently do things, the police, we have a mandate that they are constantly checking all these online sources to see if anybody pops up that did anything, it's elaborate, but anything that would warrant us pulling back. And if that happens, we can bring that person in or notify them. Guess what? You just violated X, Y, and Z, and you're not keeping your permit. And so what I would be very helpful to me if you or the sponsor would just, I hate to make you do more work, but I don't want this hearing to go on longer. Just show me how, what all they look at, maybe it's spelled out in the bill, how comprehensive it is. If anybody could just sort of give me a little more data on how comprehensive that annual review is anyway, and how it captures things and how it's really hard to evade.
Well, I can tell you generally, state police are better situated to do
I'll
that
ask
than I.
them, yeah,
But they do a NICS check, which is a federal background check.
right.
They also check 17 databases on state records. Every permit holder has to waive all of his HIPAA rights with respect to doing background checks with respect to your mental health records.
Right.
So the state police look at all that initial, and when they do it on all these renewals, but they also get the wrap back within 72 hours, I believe it is.
What's an acronym you're saying?
I'm sorry?
You said an acronym?
Wrap back is a FBI program, RAP back, FABACK. And it's a nationwide program. Maryland's a participant in this, as are many states, in which if a person is arrested and their fingerprints are taken, that goes into the system, and every participant in the wrap back system is notified if there's one of their individuals has a fingerprint match. So if I get arrested in Alaska, Maryland State Police are going to know about it in 72 hours. And they're gonna be able to investigate it immediately as to whether or not I'm still qualified to hold a permit.
And do you or this bill sponsor, I want to make sure that the Maryland State Police, whoever is doing all this, will just confirm to me, we are doing these annualized checks. We are capturing all this data. We do not have any personnel like we don't, it's not like we don't have enough people. We don't have a backlog. We don't meet our mark every year. I think I'd like to know that what they look at, that is not redoing the permit, but annually looking is working. They have enough resources and they feel like they are really capturing
So
all the data.
I will say this on that point. After Buren was decided, the Maryland State Police were inundated
Yeah,
with, and they were constantly having to pull people in from other areas, not just the licensing division, but other areas to process the applications. And now it's now up to 159,000 as of August of last year. It's probably closer to 200,000 now. So that is going to repeat every 2 years.
right.
That sort of resource strain on the Maryland State Police. If you really want to take an intermediate step, if it really is a bridge too far, do 3 and 5, which is what Delaware does. Which is at least a better step than doing an initial application after 3 and then subsequent renewals after 5. So that will at least ameliorate the burden on the Maryland State Police. By the way, the applicants, this is costly. I mean, Maryland requires 8 hours of training for renewals, 16 hours of training for the initial application as by a state certified instructor. I'm one. So that costs a lot of money. That's at least 400 minimum, perhaps as much as $800 right there. You have to do a live fire range where you have to show proficiency on a live target on a state police mandated course. This is not easy. You have to get slide scan fingerprints. The Maryland State Police keeps them forever. Hence, they're part of the RATBAC system. So this system is designed to root out people who aren't qualified. And it does a really good job at it. And the Maryland State Police, to their credit, have done a really good job of implementing it, even with the shortage of manpower that they have. And they still have that shortage. So someone, if they're curious about this, can ask the Maryland State Police how they're going to handle this input of tens of thousands of applications on a regular basis. With the resources that this body has given them.
Thank you. Thank you. That's very helpful.
Excellent. Thank you very much. For how does this intersect with LEOSA? So like if you have to renew that every year, is that right? For LEOSA?
No, LEOSA, you have to do an annual qual. This
annual qualification. And
if that's for retirees,
yeah,
under section 1893, then 26C. So, and that's why I don't see much of an urgency for qualified retirees because they're LEOSA.
Yeah.
And then preempts all Maryland law.
Yeah.
So those officers should be able to continue to be LEOSA officers and carry under the LEOSA creds without getting a permit at all.
No, I know that. Yeah.
So I don't see that they're going to have much of an impact on the Maryland State Police resources because most of them are already LEOSA.
Yeah.
And
which is
you're
why
not
you
going to
want
save
that
a lot of
amendment.
money by giving LEOSA officers 5-year permit renewals as opposed to 3-year renewals.
But if you're a retired officer, you're not doing the LEOSA certification, you're going to go to this new thing. It's just saying every 5 years instead of every 3 years.
Right.
Whatever.
And I don't know how many people that is, but I can't imagine it's very many.
Totally, state police, is it when House Bill, I remember we bifurcated, the SB 1 and then House Bill 824 or whatever it was. We put those into 2 different bills.
Right.
Is it continuous? Like it's not like once every 2, 3, it's not a set year mark. It's a continuous evaluation for permit holders, right?
So they certainly can run them continuously. I think they're required to do it yearly. So what Utah does, for example, is run on that state background check with their databases every night.
So they just run that though. Okay.
And
so they run it annually.
For non-residents, they do it a little differently.
So they run it annually, whatever but then you're required to go every 2 or 3 years.
So the initial applications
is 2 years, and then after that it's every 3 years.
Correct.
But the MSP is going to run those background checks every year anyway.
Yeah. Correct. I mean,
okay.
Honestly, you're going to catch everybody who needs to be caught.
That's how they've developed their regs, right? Or is that wasn't in the law?
Seems to be their interpretation.
Okay. So, but those are regs. Not that what we passed. Okay, I know.
It's periodic.
Okay, got it. Okay.
So save the state police a whole lot of wasted money. I mean, the state doesn't have a lot of money to waste.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I get it. That they don't want to go for the more stringent certification under LEOSA annually.
And I always suggest to LEOSA officers to get a Maryland permit anyhow, if only because there may be lapses in their quals times and the like, so they could continue to carry. But if they maintain their quals every year.
I like the clean bill, but let's keep talking. All right, Senator Fulton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just want to make sure we're accurate here that LEOSA doesn't just require the annual qualification, but you have to have like an in-service, like refresher classroom portion.
Yes,
also.
yes.
So it's not just show up and shoot and see your buddies. There's actually refresher training, legal updates, things of that use of force guidelines as a retired officer, which is a civilian now, and how it changes from your responsibility. So it's not just show up and shoot. There are trainings associated with it annually.
Fair enough, Senator Fulton. But I mean, the real impact of this bill would be on all permit holders.
Got it. Well, a lot to chew on. Thanks a lot. I'm going to call you about what you think about Rahimi. What do you think the Supreme Court's going to do?
Oh, I
What's
think
Roberts going to do? What's Kavanaugh
coming
going to
down probably within a few months, and it will hold quite categorically that states cannot disqualify people who haven't been convicted of a crime of violence or dangerousness.
You know,
So,
I thought they grabbed it to more narrowly tailor some of their. Okay, maybe they're.
No, that's not going to happen.
Oh God,
I'm
you're
sorry.
scaring me. The only.
Well,
I know. See, you know, so do you and me both. I got to tell you, that's not what this hearing's about. But anyway, all right, we'll just.
Senator,
I don't.
He's not going to get out of it. I mean,
That was supposed to be an offline conversation, but yes, yeah. Next bill. Hey,
I'll have that discussion with you because
I would love to have that discussion with you. The reason why you're scaring me on this is because we always go back and forth, and you're generally always right. Gosh.
Oh, well,
Okay.
So just to make the point, Rahimi's not going to get undisqualified. He's going to be disqualified forever. Well, no, because he's been convicted of a violent
All right.
crime, even though it's a misdemeanor.
All right.
So
All right.
if
All
it's
right.
dangerousness is going to be the
We'll
line.
talk offline. We'll take it offline. We're gonna be here to midnight.
Okay.
You and me both. All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Penick. With that, that'll conclude the hearing for Senate Bill 102. We'll now hear from Senator Bailey, there you are, Senator. Welcome back to JPR. We'll want to take Senate Bill 7 first? Which one do you want to go for first? You got the next three, so where do you want to go?
Thank you. I think 26 we'll save to the end.
Okay.
Because we have quite a few people that are going to testify on that bill, quite an emotional bill. And then I also have two more bills in B&T.
Okay.
So
you want to go Senate Bill 7
we'll
first?
go 7 first.
All right, Senate Bill 7, Senator Bailey, welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. It's a pleasure to be back here in JPR. As Senator Bailey, for the record, representing St. Mary's and Calvert County. This bill is a bill that you have heard before. It has passed this committee before, so I'm going to be brief. This would require law enforcement agencies to maintain a positive community feedback for all law enforcement agencies, officers within that agency. This bill would direct the Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission to develop a uniform process to collect this feedback from members of the public. These records would be subject to public inspection in accordance with the Maryland Public Information Act. This bill contains provisions which could create a simple, accessible, and uniform process that can be implemented by all law enforcement agencies in the state. While it is possible for law enforcement agencies to implement such a process on their own, a uniform standard would make it easier for these agencies to implement this initiative and create a fair process. Critically, This bill also creates the exemption to the Maryland Public Information Act necessary to make the release of this part of the officer's personnel file permissible under state law. So let's be clear about that. If an MPIA request about an officer is done now, no matter what exists in the personnel file, not one public information, not one positive information thing that's in their file will be released. It'll be held back. The only things that'll be released is negative, and that's just not fair. Allowing positive reports and information about officers to be collected, released, and reviewed would provide a clearer look at an officer's whole reputation. In law enforcement, an officer's reputation depends, and their future depends on their reputation and character. This bill will help to provide a total picture of the officer's work by allowing easy access to all records, both positive and negative. Assuring our law enforcement officers that their full record would be available if their reputation is questioned or challenged will be beneficial to recruitment, retention, and the future of policing in our communities and our state. This bill is identical to Senate Bill 69 from 2023 and Senate Bill 581 from 2022, as both of those bills passed this committee and passed the Senate. I respectfully request a favorable report on Senate Bill 69. I turn it over to my experts. Thank you.
Do it from right there. You're fine. Good. Feel better. Let's stand up. However you want. Members of the committee, again, my name is Richard Norman. I'm a retired captain with the Maryland State Police. I spent 28 years on a job, and now I'm the executive director of Maryland Trooper Association. I can tell you this: at the end of my career, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. At the end of my career, like every other law enforcement officer, they pull a personnel file and they look at all the good things you've done. You've saved this person, you've done that, you pulled them out of a car, you've saved their lives, you did CPR. None of that information is out there for anybody to see because it's a personnel record. We only see it when we retire and when we have a retirement in an affair. I think this is a gross misjustice. I think with all the stuff that we're giving out about police officers, we should be giving this information out. It should be available as a PIA. So the Maryland Trooper Association supports that this information be public and it be handled by this bill, Senate Bill 7, through the Maryland Police Training Commission. So, and again, we ask for a favorable report on this. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mike Shire. I'm representing the State Fraternal Order of Police. Been a sworn officer in the state of Maryland for 19 years and 357 days. Not that we count. The FOP stands in support of Senate Bill 7. Just last night, I attended a town hall meeting hosted by my county executive Pittman. I gave testimony about my role on June 28th, 2018, just down the road from here at the Capitol Gazette. I'm extraordinarily proud of our profession's response to that incident. That day, as I hurried to the call for service, the active shooter, I resigned myself to the fact that I might never see my family again, that I might not come home that day. I rushed into the building with my fellow officers. We stopped the killing and we apprehended the suspect. There's no letter in my personnel file. There is no commendation on my record. And that's okay. But I've also been the subject of false complaints. One woman filed a brutality complaint against me. She admitted that I never struck her, I never hurt her, and I didn't use excessive force. She was just upset that she got arrested and convicted. The complaint was unfounded. This General Assembly has changed the law so that not only do incidents like this never get expunged or removed from my personnel file, they're available for public inspection. Does anybody see the contrast here? You've allowed for expungement and forgiveness for citizens who commit crimes against our society, against our citizens, but police officers don't seem to be permitted to receive forgiveness today. Everything we do is permanently public. So anything we can do to provide some balance and ensure that it is as easy to compliment a cop as it is to complain against the cop, to provide a way for those who look at our records to see our good works. These things will go a great long way towards supporting our law enforcement professionals. Some people may think that Senate Bill 7 is for show. It's a messaging bill, I've heard. For our police officers, it is not. We receive many messages from the General Assembly via the bills that have been passed into law. We're asking you to collectively start considering the impact that these measures have had on our men and women with whom I serve so proudly. That you highlight the good, of which there is so much more compared to the bad. And so the Maryland Fraternal Order of Police urges you to vote favorably on Senate Bill 7. Thank you.
Thank you both for testifying and for the bill sponsor to bring this bill, important bill to us. I just want to make sure I heard you right, sir. Did you tell me that after all the work you did, all the incredible things you did at that Capitol Gazette horrific shooting, that there's nothing in your record? There's something in your record that reflects the heroism of that day. And if I had been a loved one that either lost somebody but was still here or affected deeply, and I wrote a letter and I wanted to tell everybody that you work with what you did for me, that is not something that can be in your public record alongside whatever complaints we now make available? Is that what you're telling me?
Even if there was something there, it's not subject to MPIA requests at this time. You can only get the negative information out of the
Sorry,
file.
you're using an acronym.
Sorry,
It's
the
okay.
Maryland Public Information Act. If you were to make an information request to my agency and say, I want to see this officer's record, you would get my internal affairs file that would have unfounded complaints in it, but you would not get any letters of commendation. You would not get any compliments that I've received or anything positive. You could ask me and I'd be.
Even though if I went to
tell you.
anybody else's personnel file, I'm telling you, anybody else's personnel file, and I'd had, 20 years with the group, and I had my performance reviews, and maybe there's some criticism, maybe I got in trouble once, but then there's all this stuff that I did right, all these years that I was applauded for my work. That would all be for everyone to see. That's what everyone else's personnel record looks like.
No.
But what
it's-
the law is now is, guess what? The only
Right.
thing you're gonna see are the negative, not a gosh darn thing. So it's not even a complete record.
For-
It's a half a record.
So
at
for everybody
best.
else's files, you get to see nothing. None of that is releasable. For police officer files, their negative things are releasable. Their internal affairs reports and, investigations, whether founded or unfounded, are releasable, but nothing else. So the only
Really
thing that
just
we're
the
releasing in
standard
this state
there.
as far as personnel records is negative police information.
I hope the camera can see you, but let me, and then let me just,
Sorry, should I stand up?
yes, you do need to. If you can just,
Yeah,
so I have one follow-up for either the bill sponsor, Senator Bailey, good to see you, or for you, sir. If you had been wrongfully accused, as you mentioned, does it show eventually that was dismissed or for lack of
That it
proof?
does, it will show the result of the investigation.
does do
yes,
that.
At least that,
Okay,
yes.
all right. Thank,
The positive part.
Uh,
You want to click top?
no, and by the way, we just had a
Thanks.
bill hearing that has a very different approach. I don't want to get into it, but to me, this particular small bill would go a lot further in having people want to stay in law enforcement or join law enforcement than any bill we've heard earlier today. Don't you think? No, not a question, sir. Don't worry about it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I guess we know where Senator James stands on this stuff. All right. All right. Senator Carter is next, and then
Jeff?
Yeah. No, that's like.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Senator Bailey, for bringing this bill again. I recall we did discuss this as a potential amendment to our police reform package back in 2021. And at that time, I expressed that I wasn't in favor of it because of the fact that the underlying reason that we needed to pass the laws that we did is because for decades and decades, the misconduct information was shielded and not available. And on the other hand, in contrast, there was no difficulty obtaining good information. So for example, if you were to testify somewhere and the attorney was to lay a foundation as to your background, from in the beginning of time till now, the attorney would be well within their rights to say, so Officer Bailey, how long have you been a member of the force? And in that time, have you been promoted? And what have you been promoted to? And in that time, have you received commendations? And what have they been for? But on the other hand, that other information about the bad stuff was never available. And so I think that there's a reason for this. And it's not as if you can't obtain that information or a person doesn't have the ability to present that. So what say you to that?
So I just say that the confusion that clearly exists here. What we're talking about is we are talking about a police officer's reputation. And we're talking about their reputation in their personnel file and if somebody files a complaint against them. And so the basis of this bill starts with the fact, if somebody files a complaint, you know exactly, I think it was actually your legislation, of what happens when we talk about any type of disciplinary report. It is captured, it is there, and it exists. When it is a positive impact that the police officer might have had, and that somebody picks up the phone and calls the department and says, we had a great incident that happened. We want to recommend that person. We want to put something in that person's file. Guess what? There's no standard that exists whatsoever for that department to keep that positive report. Not only that, that positive report isn't listed the way we changed the MPIA. So the only thing that we are doing is saying that there are positive and negatives that come out of a person's career when you're dealing with the public. And it is only fair to have both sides represented. That is the whole purpose behind the bill, Senator. You and I have had this discussion.
In all
before.
fairness, if someone calls the police precinct or police department and says, hey, I had a good experience and it doesn't go in the file. If someone calls and says, I had a bad experience, there's no formal complaint. That's not a part of an official record. That's something that occurred. There's no complaint made. Finally, although I haven't seen many of these records because there is still great difficulty with police departments across the state still continuing to find reasons to withhold the records upon request. I have seen a few, and when I have seen them, I see exactly what was testified to, that there were allegations against the officer and that those allegations were unfounded. And so thus, to me, in my opinion, that's nothing that could be potentially harmful because it actually shows that an allegation was made, but it was determined to be unwarranted, unfounded. So it's actually not a bad thing for the officer in those situations. It's not something that can generally be used against them because it wasn't determined to be valid.
I would offer you an application, Senator, to sign up to be a police officer and look at it from the shoes of these gentlemen that are standing up here, because it'd be completely different.
So I wouldn't want to be a police officer at this point in my life, but if I were a police officer, I would want to go into that career fully understanding that I had this obligation to be honorable and serve and protect the public, and also that there'd been a bad history that caused the legislative body to create laws to better help serve and protect the public. That's what I would want to know. Thank you.
Yes, please. I just want to say, first of all, to clarify one thing, many of the bad things that are in our files have always been subject to disclosure under Brady versus Maryland when it comes to courtroom testimony. Second of all, it was said that it's not a bad thing that we have these unfounded and unsustained complaints in our file because it shows that we didn't anything wrong. I am a police officer and I respectfully disagree. I do not want those things in my file. I would not want somebody to say, oh, look, this officer is clearly bad because where there's smoke, there must be fire. That's just not true. The harder working officers encounter more citizens and will generate more of the types of complaints that I highlighted. Citizens who are just upset and are looking to get a charge dismissed. That's just going to happen. That's part of an understanding of our job. But the more I work, the more I have those. And I don't want those in my file signaling that I might be a bad officer. I'm a police supervisor. I've been a supervisor for a number of years. I take every opportunity to pat my officers on the back and tell them they do a good job.
I don't see why anybody could oppose a standardized system that allows citizens to do the same. Right now, many agencies just keep a letter of, compliment or something in a paper file that may disappear, may fall out. There's no standardized way of keeping it. Having a standard way that requires agencies to hold on to that information so that an officer doesn't go to their personnel file, which they can inspect whenever they want, and wonder why, hey, I got a compliment a couple of years ago. Where's that letter? Where did it go? Who knows? Maybe it got misfiled. Having a standardized way of doing this so that officers have something, at least if we're going to have these bad things on their record, we can show that there are good things as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you want to stand up for a second, officer, I'm just going to ask you real quick. So is it a pleasant experience when you are sat down with the internal affairs investigators and read your, well, you don't even have Leobar rights anymore, but
Well, we have our Garrity rights, but
There you go.
I've been, unfortunately, I've had to sit down and as both a suspect and a witness. It stinks to sit down as a witness officer. It's just not fun to be interviewed in that.
And then if
that
you're
way
the
at all.
subject of the investigation, is it fair to say that it lingers over your head while you're working with the extra stressors that are associated with that, especially on ones that are erroneous or unfounded, and then they're still there on your file?
It is extremely frustrating. We say sometimes the punishment is the process. The process is the punishment.
Yeah.
Having that hanging over your head, even though you know that it is unfounded, waiting for your interview after you've been notified so that you can tell your side of the story.
Right.
And even after you've told your side of the story, what is taking so long
To get it.
for them to say, yeah, that was ridiculous. You didn't do anything wrong.
So, and then I just have one final question. So my good friend, Senator Carter, made a comment about that if somebody calls in and they give positive praise, it may not be in your file. But if somebody also calls in and, is upset about how the officer performed at that point, it may not be there either. Is that true with MPAA today? That I'm pretty sure I was under the impression that once an externally generated complaint is received by a department, it must be investigated fully.
If somebody complains of misconduct by a police officer, it has to be investigated. That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate this discussion. So I got a phone call yesterday that is unrelated to this bill, but perhaps relevant to the discussion. I just wanted to tell you about it, or ask you about it, I guess I should say. So yesterday I got a phone call from my first grade teacher who is 87 years old. And she's moving. She's moving from her home in my legislative district, coincidentally, to an assisted living facility. And so she's clearing out some of her stuff. And she called me because in doing so, she looked at her personnel file. I guess when she retired from Montgomery County Public Schools, they provided her personnel file. She taught for 50 years in Montgomery County Public Schools, but she hadn't gone through it when she retired. She's just going through it for the first time upon this move. And she was calling me to tell me that apparently my parents wrote a letter to the school after my first grade year, thanking her for teaching, and I wasn't an easy student, especially back then. And so this letter this letter is 40 years old. And it's been in her personnel file the whole time. And she found it just the other day and called me to let me know about it. Anyway, it touched me. And when I told my parents, it touched them. And I just want to let you know how meaningful that was to her, and especially how meaningful it was to me. So I thought that'd be relevant to our discussion here. Isn't that so?
That's great.
Yeah, and this is really also in support of your bill. What you just said, Senator, happened to me with my father. My father went to a school, and it's close to 100 years ago. That school kept his records, some of them, his grades, which, by the way, he was a scholar in the Constitution and other areas. He was getting C's, he was getting some bad grades. And the funniest letter was he had 4 beautiful sisters, and they were in boys and girls school, and the school told them, told his parents, you've got to keep Petticoat Junction basically away from the boys' school because they're creating too much mischief. But what I really want to tell you is having that record, good and bad, actually, right? I learned my dad was, had a lot of catch up to do, was so meaningful to me and my family. And I think, even though you didn't say this, I think that just demonstrates the humanity that's behind these personnel files and why a personnel file, if it's going to be made public, then it ought to be the complete picture, all of it, right? So I just wanted to share with you that I had that same sort of thing, and it meant so much to me that someone still had those records somewhere. It also shows you how long those records last. And so if you have unfairly besmirched someone or just only shown one side of them, what if I only saw my dad's bad grades, right? Then you're not even getting an historically accurate record of what that person's life was like in whatever they were doing. So even for posterity's sake and for the record keeping and for historians to write about policing in Maryland, for them not to have a full access to both the good and the bad, the negative and the positive, again, is just a disservice to the lives of not only the law enforcement office, but all of us that want to understand and know about our history regarding them. That's all I had to say. Isn't that so? Sorry.
No, that was actually this is really good. This is a really good debate. And infused with personal experiences is really, really great. Further questions for this panel? Seeing none. Thank you very much. Thank you, Senator. Thank you. All right. Well, now that concludes the testimony for the proponents of the bill. We'll now switch to the opponent, Ms. Levy. Deborah, good to see you.
Good afternoon, Senator.
Good afternoon. You are up. We can see and hear you.
Thank you. Okay, thanks. My name is Debbie Levy. I'm with the Office of the Public Defender Special Litigation Division. And I do just want to say I appreciate the personal stories that have been shared today, but nothing in the law as it exists would prevent any of those stories from happening today, even under the current aspect of the current version of Anton's Law. Just want to say that the bill went into effect in 2021 in a conscious effort to make law enforcement misconduct records transparent. Since that time, we've yet to see full compliance with the law. I've testified previously that our office gathers public documents from every law enforcement agency across the state, and there are major impediments in Montgomery County. We faced over $1 million in fines, 90,000 of those for redaction for just one officer. Calvert County, 200, not fines and fees, 224,000. Anne Arundel County, 16,000. We haven't gotten full access to records. What we're getting instead are summaries because officers, law enforcement agencies don't want to comply with the redaction requirements in Anton's Law. We're getting actually mistakes where things say facts sustained and they weren't. We're also getting records that do not come forward under Brady, like the officer previously just testified, for facts sustained finding for attempted rape. These are current officers, criminal association, theft, false statement. In response to these fees, this legislature promised to convene a work group to study the effectiveness of Anton's Law. That work group sunsets at the end of this month, and that work group has never been put actually into place. And we would say that there's nothing that requires this, that encourages this law to be adopted until we've had a chance to actually look at, observe, study the effectiveness of Anton's Law and why there's a lack of compliance. And let's not get to imposing this new requirement before we've even had any full compliance with the law under the current version. Lots more that I'd like to respond to, especially the notion that the prior law under Brady allowed these things to be disclosed. These misconduct records were hidden under Fields versus State, and we had to make a showing that they existed, and that wasn't accurate. And some other inaccuracies that were previously said was that people who are officers who are working would not know that these records of letters of commendation existed. That's not true under Anton's Law and the law before that. Persons of interest always have access to their files.
Thank you very much, Ms. Levy. Senator McKay has a question.
Well, thank you, Ms. Levy. I've got a question. So I hear your testimony and understand that Anton's Law is not being implemented in the manner in which it was passed, but I don't understand why you're objecting for positive comments and having a process added to that. So is your objection that you don't want positive information to be available? Or is it that the frustration of Anton's law not being implemented to its full extent?
Question. And of course, nobody would be opposed to an officer providing positive information. Like Senator Carter said, if an officer is testifying, they could certainly testify to all the positive accommodations that they have, and they would have access to it. The frustration is that every law enforcement agency in the state and overseeing this division that actually puts PIAs to every law enforcement agency in the state, I'm qualified to say that each and every one of them have complained about the redaction provisions that Anton's law requires. So even a positive comment could not be released with the name of the person who made the comment under the redaction provisions. It is put, as I understand it anecdotally, a tremendous strain on law enforcement agencies across the state to comply and to gather the records, to make estimates of the records. And they're saying that they don't have the person power, the man or the woman power to meet the requirements under Anton's law, because the records are voluminous, because of the redaction provisions. And so why would we want to add in more documents to be disclosed under Anton's law when law enforcement officers are complaining this is too much? I cannot meet the requirements. It costs me too much. They give us redaction estimates for each and every page. And so they're not even able to meet the threshold on the misconduct. We're talking, like I said, instances of rape, false statement, evidence planting. We're getting summaries of those. We're not getting the full files because they don't have the manpower, the person power to make it work. So why would we add in more information that is going to be subject to the same redaction provisions that exist in Anton's law? So it would be a meaningless letter if it would be, and I would also take issue with the fact that, look, when complaints are not sustained, when they are unfounded, lawyers are not using those in court, right? We see if a person is making a false accusation. We are educated people who are looking at the record to say, clearly that was an aggrieved human being. So people are not taking those and doing something with them that they're not allowed to do. It's just that law enforcement is not able yet to comply. And I really am very curious about the idea that there are such lengthy redaction provisions anyway. All of these things that folks want to add to the record are going to be subject to these laborious redaction provisions. So at the end of the day, what would people be getting anyway? And how could you possibly put in a uniform requirement for a positive comment without putting in a uniform requirement for a complaint?
So that's what this law or this bill is saying. There would be a uniform way to do a positive. You said meaningless letter, but you said use your words. What would be the use of a meaningless letter? That implies a bias that you're upset with why Anton law.
I didn't say the letter would be meaningless.
Ma'am, I do believe I have the floor. I allowed you to speak, please.
Sure.
So it isn't a meaningless letter. And to answer your question about why add on, taking from your website, the Maryland Public Defender policy, talks about the largest legal services, blah, 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 to ensure positive and meaningful outcomes for our clients who identify these issues and advocate for systemic change, not just in the courtroom, but with the legislature, the governor's office, Judicial Rules Committee, the media, and other state local entities to ensure positive and meaningful outcomes. Why wouldn't positive and meaningful outcomes be part of a PIA when it comes to an officer's personal file? It makes no sense why you would be objective to it other than supporting a different law that would then take Anton's law and make it implemented the way it was supposed to be passed.
Sir, I'm not opposed to the idea of spreading positive feedback. And certainly in my career, almost 20 years as a public defender, I've come across many officers who are commendable, who have been commended, and who have every right to shout from the mountaintops their commendable behavior. And there's no opposition to that at all. Our point is that there are issues with compliance with Anton's law. There was a work group that was supposed to convene. The work group was supposed to bring together subject matter experts who touched this subject. I actually was our agency's representative, and the work group never convened. And because we haven't seen a compliance yet, let's slow it down and actually study the effectiveness of Anton's Law. And is there a way to add this in when we're looking at making compliance easier for law enforcement agencies across the state? I'm not opposed. And I myself have plenty of letters. Most of those letters come to me to hang up in my office. They don't necessarily always become part of our file. And I think there's lots of mechanisms. And to your question about uniform, why are we be opposed to uniform positive feedback? There's nothing in the law right now that says here's the uniform concern feedback. Here's a way to give uniform concern feedback. And to the point about whether something is meaningless, what I meant is that this is suggesting that you post positive comments, that you make them all available. And I was saying that things have to be heavily redacted. And so would that affect the meaningfulness of the commendation letter from a citizen if they're subject to heavy redactions? So I wasn't saying that look, I've had officers who I commend, who I appreciate their good work. And we would say so if they're doing good work. We're not opposed to that concept at all. We need good officers doing good things if we're going to have officers, right? The point is that there's trouble with compliance, and let's slow it down, convene the work group that the legislature promised. The legislature passed a law promising a work group. It hasn't convened. Maybe with the work group of subject matter experts, there's a way to put this in and reach meaningful compliance for everybody, to make everybody happy. But right now it seems like we're putting the cart before the horse because we haven't convened that work group and we're still not getting full compliance. So my suggestion is to just slow it down and do what was promised by the legislature in 2022.
Well, it sounds like your testimony is for another bill and not necessarily this bill in the manner in which it was written, but thank you.
Thank you, Senator McKay. No, look, for the reasons that Senator Carter highlighted, I supported Anton's Law, and I thought it was a necessary adjustment. I've told that to members of the FOP who were here and law enforcement, had those direct conversations. And part of the piece that why I supported it is because it was comprehensive. You could see the actual disposition, and so that was there. If there was an allegation made, a claim, then you could see the final disposition, and if someone was cleared, then that would be evident and made readily available to the public. And that's why I supported it. And because, we needed that type of insight as the public. To your concerns, Ms. Levy, we are going, I know Senator Carter has legislation to extend that sunset. That work group, you're right, has not been constituted. We will work, I personally will work with Senator Carter to make sure we get that done and that the proper officials are actually appointed so we can get it up and running. Talk to OAG about it and have had conversations with our presiding officer about that as well. So we will get that up and running. And I understand the concerns you have and share those concerns that Anton's Law has not been properly implemented and adhered to. And so I get it. But this is something also that I fully support. And I think because it helps paint the full picture. And for me, more information is more instructive, is better for the public. And so you can move both of these things in parallel. And so for that, Senator Bailey, thank you for bringing the bill forward. I look forward to working with you to get it out of the committee again. With that, if there are no further questions, that will end the hearing for Senate Bill 7, and we will move on to Senate Bill 166. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Senator Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Senator Bailey, representing St. Mary's in Calvert County, District 29. Now I'm going to talk to you about Senate Bill 166, which would establish the Waterway Incident Notification System, or we call it the WINS Work Group. This bill is identical to Senate Bill 336 from last session, which passed this committee and the full Senate unanimously. The work group would study the feasibility of establishing a waterway incident notification system to notify members of the public of active waterway emergencies involving a person at risk of death or seriously bodily harm or injury from an emergency marine related event or marine hazard, such as drowning, This is very similar to the alert that we get on our phone, which is an amber alert, or you get the silver alert. This would simply be a winds alert. This legislation has been introduced in response to recent incidents in our state waterways and is intended to improve the ability of members of the public to be aware of the serious emergencies in the water in their area, both of their own safety and also that they can assist in locating individuals reporting as missing. You know, a boating accident, we talked about it last year. I had people here that testified, if you all remember what happened. We had several children that were drowning. The parents called 911. There were commercial boats working in the vicinity a quarter-mile away. The police and fire came 20 minutes later. The children had all drowned. They were all below the surface of the water. The watermen that were there came here and testified last year. They said we were a quarter-mile away. When that 911 call went out just like an Amber Alert, if it had come across, right, that's exactly how we would have done it. We had another gentleman that came who witnessed a horrific accident on the Patuxent River, and he was the first one on the scene. He made the recovery as the boat was going down and the people were unconscious, and he saved everybody's life. That's the only thing that this bill is about. It's about saving people and rescuing people because unlike a car accident, when you fall out on the highway or you fall out in the ditch, you're not going to drown. If you're unconscious in the water, you're going to drown right away. After discussions with the Maryland Department of Emergency Management, we determined that the best way to move forward is by forming a work group, and they have agreed to provide the staffing for this work group. I respectfully request a favorable report on Senate Bill 166. I thank you all for your consideration. I'll stand for any questions.
So thank you very much, Senator Bailey. Questions from the committee? All right, seeing none, that'll end the hearing for Senate Bill 166. We'll now move on to Senate Bill 26, Senator Bailey. Senator Bailey, would you like to bring up a panel?
Yes, we actually have, I think we have 3 or 4 panels that are going to come up.
Okay.
And State's Attorney Jamie Sterling is going to help manage the panels.
Okay, excellent. I'll call whomever if you want, whoever want to come up first.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, Senator Bailey from St. Mary's and Calvert County, District 29. This afternoon, I want to talk to you about Senate Bill 26, which would raise the maximum penalties for causing the death of another as a result of the person's driving, operating, or controlling a vehicle or vessel in a grossly negligent manner under 209 of the criminal law article. Under current law, a first offense is a felony and carries a maximum penalty of 10 years, while a subsequent offense carries a maximum penalty of 20 years. This Senate Bill 26 increases these penalties to 15 years for a first offense and 30 years for a subsequent offense. This legislation is named Jamari's Law for Jamari Duckett, who was a resident of St. Mary's County. And in 2022, Jamari was the victim of a car accident caused by a driver who was intoxicated and traveling at a high rate of speed. According to the investigation, immediately prior to the accident, the drunk driver was driving at speeds between 76 and 91 miles per hour on a road where the speed limit's 40. Jamari tragically died as a result of the injuries he sustained in this accident. He was 18 years old. St. Mary's County State's Attorney's Office successfully prosecuted the drunk driver in this case, who was sentenced to a maximum penalty. He got 10 years. As this is considered a non-violent offense, it is possible for the individual to serve about a quarter of their sentence in prison. This means that when considering the credits and the possibility of parole, the offender could be released in as little as 2.5 years. I believe that this is far too short of a time for the crime of manslaughter by a vehicle and vessel under these situations. It is important to note that this bill does not impose any minimum sentence. It only gives our judges further discretion in their sentencing of those who are found guilty of violating this law. As far as the panels go, we have family, attorneys, victim advocates, all are here to tell their story and how important this legislation is. I respectfully request a favorable report on Senate Bill 26. I thank you all for your consideration.
Good afternoon, Senator and members of the chair, members of the committee. My name is Jamie Sterling. I'm the elected state's attorney for St. Mary's County. We have a panel assembled for you, and what I'll ask is, I know we only get 2 minutes, so I have tried to categorize the panel so that you could see this first group and the second and third. And if you have questions, I urge you to please ask the prosecutors to come back to answer the technical questions. I'm a prosecutor, and what I do is I'm a justice seeker. And part of seeking justice is to come before you when I see that there's a problem or there's an absolute failure in our system. Senator Bailey highlighted some of the problems that we have with this law. One, it's a felony, but it's considered nonviolent. Although Senator Bailey did say that it's like you serve 2.5 years, that's really that's the max that you'll serve on a 10-year executed sentence. So the maximum penalty for vehicular homicide is 10 years. So if you receive 0 dim credits, you're going to serve 1/4 of the time. But how many times do you get sentenced to a case for a first-time offender and you get the maximum penalty? And when you get the maximum penalty, what you failed to do is you failed to receive the other parts of what we want to do for sentencing. We want rehabilitation, we want deterrence, and we want punishment. You really have to choose which pillar that you're going to support, and it's just insufficient. 10 years when you're serving 1/4 of the time is not sufficient to really support all 3 of those pillars. But here we had this case with Jamari, who was an 18-year-old graduated senior from Great Mills High School. He was working alongside of his father, John Duckett, at Showtime Deli, one of my favorite restaurants in St. Mary's County. And he was also a manager at Sheetz. He had graduated from high school and he was about to start his mechanical engineering degree. He was driving at 18 years old, and a drunk driver at 0.13 BAC had been braking at 91 miles an hour. So the system that records the speed, his braking speed was 91 miles an hour, and he was a 0.13. He collided with Jamari, and it ended his life. That case, we understand vehicular homicides or manslaughter by vehicle is a nonviolent offense. We get that it's unintentional. We get it's unintentional in that the defendant didn't get in the car and say, hey, today I'm going to get drunk and kill somebody. We understand that they didn't get in the car and say, today I'm going to kill that person. Because if he did, we'd be here for first-degree murder. So what we're bringing to you is to what we have seen as prosecutors is we see that there are purely accidental accidents. There are criminally negligent homicides. There are vehicular homicides. That's what we're talking about here, or it's vehicle manslaughter. And then there's first-degree murder. We're not talking about the other things. We're talking about vehicular homicide. Okay. And I think it's important to distinguish that we understand that this wasn't an intentional murder, but it's also important to distinguish the legislators have set out to put items in place where there's criminally negligent manslaughter, which is a 3-year offense. But when you have these instances where it's only categorized as 10 years, it is very difficult to adhere from the state's attorney's perspective, for the victim community perspective, and for a judge's perspective to really find some balance. And just as a quick list of some things that are a 10-year offense that are similar to this, you can push someone, you can punch someone, you can just threaten burning someone's house down, not even doing that. You can steal $25,000 worth of items or goods or services. You can use someone else's credit card for $25,000 worth of goods or services. You could write a bad check for $100,000. You can urinate or throw urine on an employee that works in a correctional facility. You can counterfeit documents with an intent to fraud. All of those things are what we're saying is the same value of someone's life. We get that someone didn't get in the car and say, I'm killing someone today, but that's what happened. You're going to hear from some of these families. You're going to hear their stories. We hear these all the time. They're heartbreaking, they're heart-wrenching. We thought it was really important for you to hear them because there's nothing else that I can do in my capacity or any other state's attorneys can do. We need your help. And we're here to ask you to please give this a favorable report. Please consider raising the penalties so we have more to work with, so that we can rehabilitate, so that we can provide deterrence, but so there's also punishment, so that these lives are worth more than writing a bad check. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And yeah, we don't time the elected officials, so I just thank you for that. I appreciate that. And everyone, as out of fairness for the rest of the witnesses, we do 2 minutes. So I know it's a short period of time, but I'll let you, whoever you want to bring up. And
Mr. John Duckett is going to be our first speaker, and he's Jamar's father.
How y'all doing, committee, this afternoon? Hope everybody's doing fine. My name is John Duckett. I'm Jamari Duckett's dad. My son was tragically killed last July, on July the 10th, by a drunk driver. It changed our life like forever. So I'm just hoping that no one else have to go through like what our family has been through. It's like this last year has been like really tragic, and the weight of the world is just like, I asked my wife the other day, like, how am I going to make it the rest of my life? You know, and I asked her that, like, and I never asked her that because I didn't want to put any pressure on anybody else, but I asked her that because I was like, you know, for the next 20 to 30 years, like, what's going to be the difference? And I'm hoping that it's Jamari's law, because I don't want no one else or anybody else to have to go through and feel the pain that we have been going through. Like, I know that it's many other things. And like Jamie Sterling just said, how can you compare this to like, excuse me, I just got nervous, and it's been tough. It's just been really, really, really tough. My 18-year-old son, I trained him, I prepared. He was beside me every day working. And then I stopped that job just because every day at 12 o'clock, he would come in and I would look through the parking lot to see him. And now I don't see him anymore. So it's just like the hurt and feeling in the world. I pray that you guys see this through and find it favorable for Jamari's law. Because when the next person get in the car, I want them to think of, if I leave and I'm drinking, I'm thinking about Jamari's law. Like, that's what I want them to think. I don't want them to think that I'm going to get in this car and go out there and hurt anyone else's life. So I appreciate everyone's time. I apologize for not just, it's like I was lost. Like, our life is crushed. It crushed me. Like, that was my guy. I don't know what to do. I just keep fighting every day. I keep going. I try to do other things just to make it right. But at the end of the day, I go home, I look in the mirror, and I don't have my son. And I ask you guys to please just like help someone else out. My situation is already over, but we need to make sure that the next situation doesn't have to end like this. And I thank you guys so much.
And I'm sure I say this on behalf of our committee.
Yes.
Thank you for coming and sharing what is obviously very, very painful. My prayers are with you.
Yes. Thank you so much.
And for your strength as you go through this. And you'll be carrying this right for the rest of your life.
Yes, sir.
Yet the perpetrator, only spent 3 years to deal with this for 3 years. I think that's unfair. And because, again, I asked that question, Senator Bailey, thank you for this bill again. It's a very good bill. And again, because of what you've experienced, you will, and I ask it again, for the rest of your life, you'll carry this.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
No worries. Senator West, do you want to say anything? Or?
I had a question to the state's attorney.
Sure. I was going to say, before you sit down, Senator James, did you have a question for Mr. Duckett?
I lost my daughter. So there is somebody in this room who knows exactly where you are.
Yes, ma'am.
It's going to be tough for the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But you do get up every day.
Mm-hmm.
You find some meaning. So, and like you, I found something that I wanted to do afterwards. So I get how important this is. And my heart goes out to you. I don't know if your wife is here or other members of your family, but you must tell them how much love and sympathy you have from this committee. And for me personally, obviously, I'm fighting back tears, but
I can only imagine how wonderful your son was. Just how he's you, right?
Yes, ma'am.
You lost part of
Part
yourself.
of me. Oh, yes.
You have, and it'll always feel like there's a part of you missing, right?
Mhm.
So, and I think this is a very fine bill. And your being here is making a lot of difference in how I think about it. So you have made a huge impression on me, and I think you're very brave to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Duckett, thank you for your testimony. It takes a lot of courage to come to Annapolis and before the committee to testify. And we really do appreciate what you said and your presence here. And you said something, you said your situation's over, which it's to what Senator James said, it's definitely not over. You know, I think your son would really appreciate your presence here today and the effort that you put in to continue the work. So thank you from all of us for being here. Okay, we'll go to the next witness.
Miss Greenwell is Jamar's mother, if I can ask her to come.
Hello, everybody. Well, I'm nervous because it's my first time speaking. So I did write a little speech that I can get myself through today. My life changed that night when a drunk driver, reckless, took my son Jamari away from us. Jamari was a bright and ambitious young Black man who laid out his path to success with college as his next step, only to have a careless driver block his path with a fatal blow from a truck plowing down on him like a tank to a bicycle. He had no chance. He had no chance. This is reckless in disregard for life when you get behind the wheel drunk and driving over the speed limit. That could have been you, me, your kids, parents, grandkids, grandparents in that car. Anybody could have been in the car. And to only get 10 years and out a few years later on probation is a slap to all families that has lost someone to drunk driving. I'm hoping you'll send a message and increase the penalty, because that is what it is with a vehicle. With a vehicle is no difference than a gun, just a bigger bullet. I know Jamari was going to contribute to make the world a better place to live. So let's help him still accomplish that goal and pass Jamari's law. Thank you. Thank you. Right. Oh.
This is a picture of Jamari. I don't know if it would be appropriate to, can we pass that? Is that okay? Okay. And I can get the next panel, if that's okay. All right. This is Carolyn Gramis is coming up. She's a prosecutor from Anne Arundel County, and she will help moderate this panel, and I'll kind of stand back.
Would it be acceptable if I stood with each of the people who are going to speak next to them, or
course.
do I need to sit down?
No, you can, however you'd like to do it.
Oh, okay.
To say this is the toughest thing I've ever done is an understatement. But even more than that, the loss of our son Brandon is probably the most painful thing that's ever happened in our lives. Brandon was a very kind human being. He was sweet, a gentle giant, and a heart. I just wish you could have met him. To say our lives haven't changed is a complete understatement. And the fact that we've lost everything is an exact statement. Brandon was going to work that day. My husband was taking him to work. And this happened April 2nd of 2023. He was going into Marley Station Mall, and a drunk driver, we had an Equinox, he had a Tundra. Brandon in the passenger side took the full blow of the engine and the truck so that it knocked Brandon in the driver's seat, my husband in the back seat. The police, I got a call from work because I worked with Brandon. And they were like, Brandon's not here. And I'm like, no, that's not normal, because Brandon's philosophy was, if you're on time, you're late. If you're early, you're on time. And both of our sons stuck by that. The next call I got was that my car was involved in an accident. I immediately called our older son, Josh. We headed up there. We stopped. They stopped us at traffic. Josh got out to see what was going on. One police officer called another police officer down. They stopped Joshua and they told him his father had died. And Joshua said, well, what about my brother? And the police officer looked at him kind of like shocked. He said, no, the younger gentleman died. And he said he wasn't the driver. That tells you the impact and blow that my son took that day. Thankfully, he didn't feel anything. And that's my saving grace. But I beg you, we went to court yesterday. I'm sorry. We went to court yesterday. The guy seemed to have no remorse, no apology, wouldn't look at pictures. I stepped out when they went over the accident because my survival is to know that my son died instantly. I didn't feel anything. Every day is a nightmare. It's like you wake up and you want to believe that this is not real, and it is. But yesterday showed me something. Brandon's life's not going to be for nothing. I will, until the day I die, fight to have this law. You can say it's not murder. It is. The guy drove 4 times drunk. He had a breathalyzer on his truck, and he still managed to murder my son. These breathalyzers don't work. Just allowing them a slap on the wrist isn't going to change anything, but it destroys us that are left behind. And something's got to be done. My life, my son's life, Jamari's life, and anybody else, our children's and our family members' lives have to mean something. Not 2.5 years, not a $5,000 fine, and not a breathalyzer that doesn't work. It has to be changed, because it could be your child, your brother. Our son has no, when Miguel and I die, our son that's left behind doesn't have that. This is my brother with me. He doesn't have that anymore, and it's devastating to him. We were a family of 4. It was always the 4 of us against the world. And we're all broken, and this is what we have. And I said yesterday, my heart, my whole heart, had another full heart for my Joshua and for my Brandon. I now have a half a heart and no heart. So please, I beg you, please make a difference. Thank you.
My name is Megan Moore. I'm a lifelong resident of Anne Arundel County. And I share my testimony with the hopes that you will vote to advance this bill to become law. This is an ongoing story. My life was forever changed June 5th, 2021, when my son Noah was killed in a car crash caused by an impaired and reckless driver. This is my reality every moment of every day. While I struggled to cope with my new existence, I counted on our justice system to provide consequences for the driver who chose to get behind the wheel that night. The driver pled guilty to negligent manslaughter and DUI. He received a jail term of 10 years with all but 18 months suspended. The driver served 9 months and 1 week. Noah, my leap day baby, was just 21 years old when he was so tragically killed. I struggle to find the words to perfectly describe him. as I will not be able to truly capture his spirit, his zest for life, his charm, and his unwavering loyalty and dedication to family and friends. It continues to take my breath away that he is really gone. I acknowledge the driver did not intend to kill Noah, but he did choose to drive recklessly and impaired, which resulted in Noah's death. There must be consequences for such careless decisions to deter others. We need laws that instill fear of the repercussions for actions that lead to such devastating loss. I implore you to support Senate Bill 26. Strengthening these penalties is critical in promoting accountability and deterring actions that lead to irrevocable loss. Thank you for your consideration and commitment to justice.
Good afternoon, and thank you for your time. My name is Danny Murphy, and I am here on behalf of my husband Douglas and his ex-wife, my friend Monica. On April 22nd, Matthew, his mother, and his brother Patrick are on a walk, a Sunday afternoon walk through their neighborhood. Meanwhile, some distance away, a drug-impaired individual is choosing to climb in his van, turn on the engine, and begin driving. Eventually, the van makes its way into the area where Matthew and his family are walking. As the van rounds the corner in a residential neighborhood, the drug-impaired driver overdoses and veers the van off the road, plowing into a sidewalk. Years later, this sidewalk will serve as a memorial for people to remember and never forget how one negligent decision can shift an entire world. I wish I could say this was an isolated event or that scenarios like this don't happen nearly every day, but they do. Too often, ignorant individuals discard their knowledge of the law and what is right because negligent behavior is regularly diminished in court. I'm going to repeat that again, regularly diminished in court. Such is the case in the justice of Matthew. The man who hit him and killed him is currently free. He is free to live his life. He is free to hug his child. My husband and Matthew's mother are not. Society only functions the way it does because the average person is not afraid to leave their home. The average person holds the belief that laws they abide by will protect them. Ignorance of these laws should not be confused with accident. Ignorance of these laws requires the proper consequences. Matthew will never get his life back. My husband, his ex-wife, and their living son, Patrick, will never be able to outlive the memory of what happened. So adding years to a sentence that will never replace a life is the only way to ensure Matthew and children like him and people like him lost to negligent behavior will be remembered, and those who were not victims yet remain protected. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Douglas Murphy. I'm Matthew's father. The gentleman, the man who did this, watched his friend overdose, left the scene because he was in a company vehicle and didn't want to get caught. He knowingly took the same drugs that overdosed his friend 1/2 mile from his own house with his own son. To say, I believe that there needs to be an upper level for egregious acts. This isn't somebody who dropped a cup of coffee and veered off a road. This is someone who willingly, knowingly, and truthfully, probably gleefully left the scene, but was still going to get high. I'd give anything for one more minute. And on a beautiful spring day, he chose to go get high instead of spend time with his son. yet he's walking today. And that's, so I ask you, please, give these prosecutors what they need. Because we all know that once it gets into the Department of Corrections, we're just a number. How much time has he served? It doesn't matter what he did. It's just how much time did he serve? And the parole committee, he's just another guy. Did he take his test? Great, let him go. It's not fair to the families. It's not fair to my son. Thank you.
Senators, my name is Monica Murphy. Matthew was 12 years old. And yes, it was a beautiful spring day. And we were walking to get a haircut with my youngest son. And this man decided just to ruin our lives instead of his own. This is so difficult for me, but I had to be here to support this bill. So I really hope and pray that you take this seriously, because we are all hurting and our lives are devastated, and he is walking free. Thank you.
May I complete the facts that she wanted to present regarding, I was the prosecutor on this case, so if I could just finish out her time briefly so that you have an understanding of the factual basis as to how this occurred. He was at a house that people were using drugs. One of the people that was using drugs overdosed. They had to call police and EMS. He didn't want his work van. So he got out of his vehicle. He was in the Cape St. Clair area. He left and he went to a convenience store, got himself an energy drink and a lighter because he had one more piece of crack that he wanted to smoke. He didn't want to take that crack home. So he decided, I'm going to smoke it as I'm driving. In his left hand is the crack pipe, in his right hand is the lighter. He is lighting that and he overdoses as he's doing it. At the same time, Monica, Patrick, and Matthew are walking. Matthew, 12 years old, is carrying a stick. He is walking and he's taking the stick down the sidewalk as he's making the noise with the stick because it's a beautiful day. It's at that time he passes out. He goes straight forward. They're walking on the sidewalk. Because he hits the curb, Patrick's able to jump into the bushes to get to avoid being struck. Monica is trying to grab. I'm sorry. She wants me to tell you this. Attempted to grab Matthew to keep him from being struck, but she couldn't. The van went up on the sidewalk over Matthew's body. Because he was passed out, it did a complete U-turn, running him over again. The vehicle goes off into the woods. He is completely out. Police, EMS, everyone arrives on scene. They revive him with the crack pipe still in his hand. The lighter on the ground now. The maximum sentence I could work with was 10 years. They wanted those facts so that you understand them, that this does not give the upper limits as what is needed for this bill. Thank you for letting me do that. Thank you. I also would like to just, I'm Carolyn Gramis. I'm an assistant state's attorney in Anne Arundel County. I do violent crime, but basically my sole function is to anyone who's killed, seriously injured by a boat, a vehicle, or train. These are just a portion of my victims, except for the top one. This is the midshipman mom murder. So they're included. This is what I look at every day on my bulletin board. So I see why I fight. I have a small section on another part of my bulletin board that shows the lives that have survived. I have 4. And these, although there's one from 2016 because it had such an impact for my life back then, these are all within the last 4 to 5 years, but it's not all of them. The cases in which we need additional sentencing to give me the tools I need. Just yesterday, the De Leon family stood in front of a court and I asked for the 15 years because he had priors. Not only did this gentleman have a prior for drunk driving, he was awaiting going to court on 2 pending. The Motor Vehicle Administration gave an interlock to him so that we could ensure some type of safety. He had someone else blow into it. I was able to show those records. But I have to fight to find everything I can to say, we need more. With that interlock, he had someone else blow into that interlock, was able to start the vehicle. He continued on a straight path for 6 minutes until he was stopped by the DeLeon car. And they suffer from that. He got the 15-year sentence, which is the maximum I could get. But this deserved more. Anthony Jean Louis was struck and killed by a gentleman going 110 miles an hour. He was Snapchatting, he was on the phone with his wife, and he was drunk. Struck the vehicle from behind. Mr. Jean Louis, it's this gentleman right here. He was coming home from a date driving 55 miles an hour on Route 10 here in Anne Arundel County. He was struck from behind with such force, it propelled him into the guardrail. He was decapitated. I go on scenes for these because I need the passion that I have for these so that I can advocate for the families that you hear here today. And there's so many more. Give us the tools that we need to go to court, to get sentences. Not every case is appropriate for a 20 or a 30-year sentence. The man who was decapitated, his defendant, he got the 10-year maximum because he didn't have prior DUIs. He had prior assaults. But I got a failing to, he left the scene as well. He also caused life-threatening injuries. He had other cases as well. I got a 30-year sentence by tacking on as much as I could come up with. 30 years suspend all but 20. But I had to fight. I have to be creative. I have to try to find every single thing, every tool that's in my toolbox. I have to pull it out. This is the most socially acceptable form of homicide. Please give a favorable for this Senate bill and give the prosecutors the tools they need.
Hello, my name is Brian Enlich. I come at this from a different angle all the way around. I'm retired law enforcement. When I retired, I started working for the State's Attorney's Office in Anne Arundel County. I'm a victim advocate. I work with Carolyn on all of these cases. For every person you're hearing their story of today, there's hundreds over the years that you haven't heard, that you need to know about. Because this is something that I can tell you from my friend group in high school and college. I can probably name 10 or 15 people that I grew up with that I am not associated with now that have had DWIs. It's not acceptable. Everybody looks at it because there is hardly any penalty. They look at it like, oh, I'll get past this. And it's sad, but even people that are killing people are getting past it way too easily. So as a citizen of this state who drives into Annapolis every day, just like you, so I work over at the circuit courthouse, I beg you to please pass this favorably. Because all of these people, they understand, and we need everybody else to understand that there needs to be a higher penalty. If we can't do anything, we can try to deter people from doing it. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, and distinguished members of the Judicial Proceedings Committee. My name is Kirsten Riddle. I'm currently an Assistant State's Attorney in St. Mary's County. Prior to that, I served as an Assistant State's Attorney in Prince George's County, where I handled motor vehicle manslaughters for over 10 years. You've heard from the families today, and as my colleague indicated, this is a socially acceptable form of homicide. I couldn't have said it any better. Because people view it as an accident. As one mother indicated, it's not an accident, it's a collision. When I speak with my investigator, we don't use the term accident, we use the term collision. People think that this is just a horrible accident, a tragic accident. It's not a tragic accident. It was a deliberate decision by an individual who had no business being behind the wheel of a car and they have exacted an unthinkable price, an unthinkable cost from these families. The hardest part of meeting with victims' families that I had in Prince George's County, with explaining to them that the maximum that they could penalty that was available to me was 10 years. And then explaining if they received the 10 years, because that was not always the case. I had a judge in Prince George's County that always gave 1 year, period, no matter what the offense was, no matter what the facts were. I had to explain that if, and that was a big if they received 10 years, that they would only do 2.5 years, serving only 25% of that 10-year sentence for killing their loved one. The current maximum sentence of 10 years does not reflect, and you've heard it, the grievous harm that has been inflicted when a defendant robs a family of birthdays, graduations, weddings, and grandchildren. In looking at other penalties, as Ms. Sterling indicated, for other offenses, the current penalty for third-degree burglary is 10 years, while the current penalty for theft of $100,000 or more is 20 years. I believe that it is a sad commentary when one property crime is on the same level as the taking of human life, while another property crime is afforded greater value than the taking of a human life. Damaged property can be repaired and stolen property can be replaced, but a human life once taken is gone forever. Today, I echo the sentiment of a grieving family who asked me how many people have to die before the penalty for motor vehicle manslaughter is increased. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Kurt Erickson. I'm president of the Maryland nonprofit Washington Regional Alcohol Program, which is a 42-year-old charity fighting drunk driving and underage drinking. You've heard a lot of testimony today. Let me just use 1 minute, and you have our written testimony. Let me just use 1 minute to talk about our support of this bill and its efforts to counter existing Maryland sentencing guidelines for vehicular manslaughter, which, as State's Attorney Sterling detailed, result in ineffectual and remarkably low incarceration sentences by increasing the maximum periods of imprisonment for persons convicted of vehicular manslaughter, including for those convicted of such and having been previously convicted of a number of crimes, including driving under the influence of alcohol, driving while impaired by alcohol, or driving while impaired by drugs or controlled dangerous substances. As Maryland bore witness to an increasing number of traffic deaths in both 2022 and last year, and that over a quarter of Maryland's roadway fatalities still involve drunk drivers, a meaningful deterrent and penalty for drivers controlling a vehicle in a, quote, grossly negligent manner, close quote, which results in death of another, is both paramount and overdue. As a means of better equating the sentences with the lethal crime, RAP supports Senate Bill 26 and urges your consideration of favorably reporting said legislation. Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chair, distinguished members of the committee. My name is Patrick Gilbert. I'm a Senior Assistant State's Attorney in Wycomico County, and I'm here this evening on behalf of the Maryland State's Attorneys Association to urge a favorable report for Jamari's Law. The committee's heard from families who've been directly impacted by this kind of conduct, and there's nothing that I can add to better underscore the profound loss that is inherent in every one of these prosecutions. I'm going to focus my comments this evening on the community interest at stake here and the more granular aspects of this bill and of these types of prosecutions generally. People of Maryland listen to and they take direction from this body and the issues that it prioritizes. We've talked today about the messages sent by particular bills and the effects that ripple through our communities based on those messages. In an age of increasing distractions available to drivers, and at a time when we've established a commercial marketplace for recreational cannabis, it's more important now than ever for the General Assembly to reaffirm what it expects of drivers. When you get behind a 3,000-pound machine, you have to do it responsibly. Issuing a favorable report on Jamari's Law telegraphs the importance of this to the entire state. And finally, one thing I don't want to get lost is precisely how serious the conduct addressed by this bill is. This offense requires the state to prove that a defendant engaged in conduct that is of extreme or outrageous character and evinces a wanton or reckless disregard for the value of human life. We are so far outside of the type of conduct contemplated by ordinary civil negligence. reported opinions that interpret this statute examine scenarios like street racing in a crowded area, one particularly tragic case where a driver struck a pedestrian and then dragged the stroller she was pushing and her 3-year-old grandson for another half mile. Put simply, the jury finds beyond a reasonable doubt that an individual has engaged in this conduct. The court needs more in order to achieve a resolution that more closely approximates justice. I'd welcome the committee's questions on this bill and how these cases look in practice on the ground.
Thanks for this panel. We have a question from Senator Fulton.
I want to thank you, State's Attorney Sterling, for bringing this forward. I do have a question, and I wanted to ask about when was the last time that this law or a law surrounding these type of violations has been revisited to your knowledge or have a penalty increased regarding drunk or drug driving?
If you all could come up to the podium to answer.
I don't have any specific information as to 2209 or I would say 2210, the criminally negligent manslaughter. I think that's probably one place where we kind of put this new standard of criminal negligent manslaughter. I would say that the life-threatening injuries, the homicide, I don't know of any in my time in the last 10 years, except for those additional statutes.
That's kind of where I was going. So I wanted to make sure I wasn't wrong.
No, I am not aware.
So as someone that has done fatal crash reconstruction and had hundreds of investigations and made hundreds of notifications, I will tell you that this is long overdue. And I applaud your efforts in bringing this forward. And I want to recognize the families for coming out, because it's not an easy thing. And I absolutely applaud you guys. Your loved ones are very proud looking down upon you, carrying on their story and their message, because unfortunately, a part of their message is that incident. And for you to fight for resolving that is a very noble thing. So I thank you. I thank all of you for coming out. And I look forward to this bill coming forward for a vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. And before I ask my technical question of the state's attorney, thank you all for being here. I do want to just say again to any parents that are still in the room, and I am not in any way trying to do a hierarchy, but to the mother who had to see her son die and tried to save him, you know, and then to all of you, that's a terrible, awful burden you carry to the day you die. And for all of you, you carry this horrible loss till the day you die. So what I think that I'm getting from your testimony is that any young person's death is almost always untimely, even if it's cancer. You know, it's just a damn, excuse my French, damn tragedy, right? I think what's killing you in a way is how offensive this statute is. It just offends me that this is all you can do, right? I do get there are accidents and they, you know, that involve people that have been intoxicated. That's one thing. But this statute doesn't acknowledge the careless, reckless, callous indifference that people's conduct is making. So it's almost worse that you go to court because you think you're going to feel some justice. And then for your family, for your loved one. And it's almost a slap in the face because in your mind this is not true, but this is what's going on in your mind. My child was worth 2 years. Right? It's almost worse than if they died of cancer, in the sense that you wouldn't have at least that one negative thought that that's all the value of my child. That's why this is offensive. The way it is working currently. This is a question, sort of, but also just an acknowledgement to the family. And I know how hard I could not do what you've done. It's been 5 years. I could not do it within the few years that you've dealt with it. I can't even do it now. So I'm very brave. I wanted to just clarify, because I do see in the statute that you can get some more time, if you will, with some other violations. And this is probably for another day, but I'm starting to think that if not just increasing the years, which I agree. Thank you for the sponsor of not mandating it. So at least give the judge the tool and you all the ability to present the unique facts of these cases. But it's almost caused me to think that if it's not in here, that there ought to be a statute, another statute that talks about these extreme cases of reckless indifference, callousness, repeat offenders. But in any event, that might be, so the only thing I was asking is in 2, there's a lot of other sections. So maybe that's capturing some other terrible behavior or not.
Sure, let me take your, I think the clarification technical point.
Yeah, it's just
in a
technical
couple of
question.
pieces. I think the statutes that you're referring to might just be, there's vehicular homicide, then there's homicide by drunk driving, there's criminal negligence, and then there's subsequent offender portions of it. So there's different kind of pieces to it. Vehicular homicide or manslaughter by motor vehicle, this enumerated bill kind of encompasses all of those things. I hear you loud and clear. I do agree that you really hit the nail on the head there. It is kind of this offensive kind of feel to after someone's found guilty of this particular part of homicide. Manslaughter is a type of homicide. I think Carolyn and some of the others have stated it well, that this is kind of what we have deemed as socially acceptable homicide, but it's not. But it's because it's different than intent, malice, first degree murder.
Yeah, I'm a lawyer. I get that. I do.
But I do think the additional kind of the strike or the additional callousness of it is it's a nonviolent offense. It's considered a nonviolent offense, although
There's a lot of violence
and
there.
so I believe Senator Carozza has sponsored a separate bill that would make this a crime of violence for parole eligibility. So instead of it being 25%, it's 50%. But what I would add to all of these things as well, and I think this will kind of help with your assessment, the other kind of offensive nature of this is that now the Division of Corrections is allowing for house arrest. So in these instances where we're getting 10-year offenses, and they're only serving a quarter of the time, if they get the 10 years. So some judges are saying, look, I don't want to make this completely punishment. I do want a little bit of deterrence and rehabilitation. So I'm going to do 10 suspend all but 5 or 10 suspend all but 8 or 10 suspend all 18 months. This is a nonviolent crime. So it's a quarter of the sentence because they want that probation, right? Except for even if they get the 10 years, full 10 years, they go up to the Division of Corrections and they're eligible for house arrest. And it's just extremely offensive. You've heard these families, and to hear that they have had to go through what they went through, then an entire court proceeding is very difficult to get a conviction in these cases, extremely difficult, because this isn't just general negligence. So in itself, we have categorized this. It's not criminally negligent, which is a 3-year offense. This is already so difficult. And then when we get that, and we get to the next hurdle, and we get to sentencing, then we get maybe the 10 years if we're lucky. Then they get parole eligible for a quarter, and then they might be out in house arrest, and there's no probation. And it's just so offensive.
Can I ask you again, just technical question? So we couldn't write a law that said you cannot give people house arrest. And I'm not trying to create a problem. That's in the purview of house, corrections. That's number 1. 2, you can't, I think this is a bill for another day, but I would love to work with you on this. This is what, and I just want to make it clear for the record. I get that there are just some, you're under the influence and you cause an accident and they're not at this level. Okay. So I'm not trying to go after everybody that's imbibed, especially when they were younger and it didn't result in something as horrible as this. But what I see from you brought the worst of the worst cases. These worst cases are the ones that this current law is not sufficient for, right? That's what this is for. So I applaud you all, but I do want to understand it a little more. And we don't have to do it today because I don't want to extend the hearing, but what other options we have for possibly to make these kind of cases and the people that cause the lifelong havoc, the lifelong tragedy that the rest of you will experience, more accountable for what they've done. Thank you,
Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. After all this very affecting testimony, it's hard to turn to the more prosaic aspect of numbers, but I want to do that. So In other neighboring states, the amount of diminution time that's available seems to be a lot less than Maryland. In Pennsylvania, it's 25%. In Virginia, it's 13% reduction per total available. In the federal system, it's 12.9%. In Maryland, as I read the law, it's 50%. But then you said that if a 10-year sentence could result in only 2.5 years, how do you compute the 2.5 years?
So that's for violent crimes. So if something's categorized as a violent crime, it's 50% that they'll serve, but this is
There's a
considered,
limit of 50%
yes,
reduction.
and this is considered a non-violent crime.
And so in Maryland, the rule is on nonviolent crimes, the total reduction can be up to 75%.
It is. So what happens is you're eligible for parole at 25%. All of the people here that you see, I go to parole hearings. If they come up for parole and they've got to keep fighting if they're not already set out on house arrest.
Oh, okay. So you're
So
talking about parole.
It's
So
parole.
the
It's not
diminution-
automatic.
The
but-
diminution credits automatically take you down to as much as 50%. And then once you get there, you can apply for parole after you've only served 25%.
You're eligible automatically at 25%. It's
Right.
happening in the detention center. It's happening at the OC as well.
So if you don't get paroled at 25%, you get out automatically when you get to the 50% level if you've qualified for that many diminution
Yeah,
credits.
you'd be getting your credits for whatever, if you're working and all of that stuff. Yes, that is correct.
Okay, great. That clarifies it for me. Thank you.
Anything?
No. Okay, go ahead.
All right. Are there any other folks? Is anyone else on the list to
That's
testify?
it. We're just here to answer the questions unless Senator Bailey has anything to add. We really appreciate
Excellent.
okay, thank you. Thank you.
Oh, we've got two people joining us virtually, so we'll let them, one virtually and then one information. All right, so we'll go with the information. Who's that? Mary Bartlett?
No.
Marie Barton? Is Marie Barton here?
Miss Barton was here. I'm happy to speak. She asked if I could. I said I didn't think I'd be allowed to. She is one of my victims from my cases. If I'm allowed to just give her story briefly, I can tell you. Otherwise, she had to leave because she had to leave at 4 o'clock.
Okay.
But she's in support. Her son was killed. We just came from court for a modification hearing this afternoon. We were there at 1:30. He got a 10-year sentence to spend all but 18 months. This is a boating collision, drunk boating. Her son drowned after they struck a piling. And he was given 18 months on June 9th of last year of 2023. They filed for a modification. It was set in today. It was denied, but he's going to be released in 2 months after serving about 9 months. So she wants you to know that she asks that you push that this is favorable, that her son was just killed about 1.5 years ago.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. Thank you. So that'll conclude the testimony for the proponents of the bill. We'll now switch to the opponent. Actually, is Ann Kirsch, you're up. Hey, good to see you.
Good to see you too. Thank you, Chairman Smith and members of the committee. I want to talk about the price tag because according to the Maryland Manual, Maryland at a Glance, in fiscal year 2022, the monthly cost of room and board and healthcare per inmate was $4,968, which amounts to $59,616 per year per person. And that's a little more than I remember it being, but it seems like everything's a little more than I remember it being these days. That means a 10-year increase in sentence amounts to a $600,000 increase in cost per sentence. 2 convictions under this is over $1 million. 20 convictions is over $10 million. And what are we getting for that money? There's no deterrent effect of an increased sentence on a crime without intent. And manslaughter by vehicle or vessel, by definition, is an accident. There's already an increased penalty with DUI baked into the statute that raises it up to 15 years. So what we're getting is an increase in mass incarceration, something that Maryland is currently spending a ton of money and man hours trying to reduce due to all the collateral consequences that I know I don't need to talk to this committee about. That's a really bad investment. But here's a better one. If we have tens of millions of dollars, why don't we spend it working to prevent accidents through initiatives like traffic safety, alcohol control, diversion programs, drug treatment, and other community programs that enhance our way of life? So I'm asking you to vote against SB 0026 because I'd like to see us spend our taxpayer dollars saving lives instead. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions from the committee? Seeing none, that will conclude the testimony for the opponents of the bill and the hearing for Senate Bill 26. Before we conclude and wrap up, you head up to Senator Muse. Just want to say to the families, coming down to Annapolis, to the State House, to this committee in particular is very, very, very difficult and time consuming and obviously emotional. And I just want to say thank you for your time and for sharing your stories and for being part of this process. It means a lot to all of us and obviously to your loved ones. And just want to say thank you from the committee for taking your time and sharing your stories. It means a lot to all of us into this process. So thank you. All right, with that, that'll end the hearing for Senate Bill 26. Thank you very much, Senator Bailey. We'll now head on to Senator Muse with Senate Bill 190.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to ask our sheriff to come up. We have other delegates here. This is the first time I've had all three of my delegates in one hearing, and I'm proud of that, and I'm proud of them. I also know that it's been a long day, and I apologize to them, and especially to our sheriff for having to be here this long out of their day, and for you all having to miss all of your committee hearings today. But anyway, good afternoon to all of you. And this has been an emotional day, hasn't it? Been emotional. It takes its toll on you, I am sure. I will go as quickly as I can. This is SB 190. And as I said, I have our Delegate Jamila Woods, and Prince George's County Sheriff John Carr on the panel with me. In a nutshell, Senate Bill 190, law enforcement wellness checks requirements, is legislation that would require a law enforcement agency that receives a qualified request. You'll see in your bill it's defined by law. The definition by law is in your bill for a wellness check to conduct the wellness check immediately. The definition of a qualified request is outlined in the legislation, which means a verbal or written request that includes sufficient information that has specific life-threatening concern that calls for an immediate response. I'll explain that in a moment. Currently in Maryland, we all aware with the number 211, the phone number, which is a simple and a number that everyone can remember for Marylanders to connect with essential resources throughout the state. It's free, it's confidential. It's a confidential service that enables individuals with unmet needs to have those needs met, so that our constituents do not have to navigate through the bureaucracy and a number of health and human services, service agency phone numbers, websites, and community resources. The federal government made the National Suicide Prevention Number an easy 3-digit number in 2020, which is 988. While 211 and while 988 have both been amazing resources for our constituency, there are some cases in which there are extreme and life-threatening situations that again call for an immediate response from our public safety officers. And this is really all that SB 190 is designed to do. Delegate Woods sits to my right, has a personal story. We all in our district went through it. You did, and we all went through it. You can come hang with us just because you've been good to us on your committee. Anyway, but Delegate Jamila Woods, we went through this together, a situation that she had that we will share with you. She has a personal story that she'll share about her late son, Gabriel, who died on the morning of September 7th, 2021, because an immediate wellness check was not done because it could not be, as they put it, verified. Don't know what that means. She'll go into further detail, but very quickly, her son, Gabriel, lived in Richmond and he had some health issues. After not hearing from her son, the delegate called the Richmond Police Department to do an immediate wellness check. However, there was a requirement for Prince George's County Police Department to contact the Richmond Police Department to verify the request. All of this back and forth went for hours and delayed the immediate wellness check, which was necessary because of Gabriel's health issues, specifically having seizures. I believe, and so do all who are here, that had that response been early and considered immediate, he would not have died the way that he did on that day, with our delegates still trying to move the police officers forward just to make a wellness check. I have a friendly amendment. I'd like to add Gabriel's Law to the title of the bill, which will match the cross file of HB 404. I'm proud to have you here today to tell your story, and all of you who are with her. I urge a favorable report for this bill, and I thank you for your attention and for the long day that we've been here, and for the emotional day that you've all experienced. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Delegate Jamila Woods. Thank you to all of you for JPR for this opportunity. On September 7th, 2021, I made the call that I make to my son, made frequently to my son to check on him because he had a serious physical condition. The prior month, he had 4 seizures, and 2 of the 4 seizures, he stopped breathing. And so it was my daily task to check on my son to see how he was doing. On September 7th at 7:32 a.m., I texted him. My son knew that if he couldn't talk, he texted me back, or we talked, and he would say, "I can't talk now." That's cool. I got it. I went from 7:32 until 10:30 in the morning trying to reach him. When I could not reach him, I proceeded to contact his job. My son never missed a day of work. He never was a no call, no show. The job informed me that my son had not shown up from work. After that, I called his apartment complex. I said, "Can you all please check on my child? I think he's having a medical emergency. No one can reach him. He's a no-show." They said, "We can't do anything. You have to call the police. They have to give us permission to enter the apartment." I called the Richmond Police Department. The Richmond Police Department said to me, "No problem. The only challenge is we have to have approval from your local police station in order to validate your request, in order for us to go and do a welfare check of your son." I called Prince George's County. Our system, well, as many of you probably know, is the, oh Lord. The number is, no, I know the number. I'm trying to say who answers the phone. Can somebody? Homeland Security. Thank you. Dispatch answers the phone. I'm sorry. Homeland Security Dispatch answers the phone. I explained everything I explained to everyone else, and they said, "Well, you need to file a missing persons report." I said, "No, I don't need to file a missing persons report. I need a wellness check. I know my child. I know his symptoms. I'm a licensed social worker. I do this all the time. I literally every week have to make a decision as to request a welfare check. So I know the procedures. I know the process." I explained to them. They were like, "If you would just listen, ma'am." I'm saying, "No, you all need to listen to me. My son is having a medical emergency. I need help." So then they said, "Well, you call Prince George's County, your local district." I called my local district. I said, "Listen, Richmond is," they were ready. They said, "Hey, we'll do the welfare check. They just have to validate that this is a valid request." And so they took all of my information over the phone. I said, "This is immediate. It's an emergency." They took my information over the phone. My first thought was that they had already contacted Richmond Police Department and that the Richmond Police Department was going to move forward. Hours later, officers came to my house. They literally blocked my street off. 2 patrol cars, 4 officers blocked my street off put me through this whole series of questioning, and I'm saying, I just need a welfare check. I know this is a medical emergency. I need this to happen. I never knew in my life that there are jurisdictions. It's not just in Richmond, but some in the same state have that process that you have to get permission from someone to do a welfare check. They told me if my son had if I had lived in Richmond, it would not have been it wouldn't have been an issue. It would have been done. They told me if my son had lived in Maryland, it would not have been an issue. The welfare check would have been done. So what I'm hearing is because I lived outside of the state, I had to go through all of this process to get a welfare check done, which made absolutely no sense to me. Unfortunately, in this process, because it's now hours later, I called my son's ex-girlfriend and I said, I just need you please to call. She was able to get a welfare check done. She was able to get them to go. The police department went, the fire department went, they knocked down the door. My son was deceased. He had had a seizure, he fell and he hit his head, and there had been no response for hours. The shower was still running. His clothes were laid out on the bed as he was preparing to go to work that morning. I stand before you and ask, it says in the legislation very clearly that the specific life-threatening concern for immediate action or response. I get it that some people make calls and, go through all of these different processes for frivolous reasons. But this legislation specifically says, life-threatening concerns for immediate action or response. I believe that when a person calls and tells you background that I was a historian, I was able to provide the information regarding my son's condition, regarding the fact that I had already done the work in terms of calling the job, calling the apartment complex, calling a number of people to say, I need help, that it took all of the hours before they knocked my son's door down at 6:17 p.m. And I'll say starting, because I started at 7:32 in the morning, but I started reaching out to the authorities at 10:30 in the morning, and his door wasn't knocked down until 6:17 p.m. I can't help believe that for my son and for others that have to go through this process, that it is a ridiculous process. And I am asking for a favorable response in these conditions when a reputable person is asking and they are indicating to you without the shadow of a doubt that it is a life-threatening emergency. Thank you.
Riley, good job. Good job.
Good evening, Chair and members of the Judicial Committee. My name is Deborah Harrington. I'm a close family friend of the deceased and his mom. I'm just here to share with you, I'm not in law enforcement, I'm in love enforcement. I feel like a situation like this, all of you seated here today, everyone seated here, has a loved one that lives in another state. It could be your mom, your dad, grandparent, son, daughter, any loved one. And you know their routine. And they communicate with you often. And you call them. And you know your mom goes to church every Sunday. And you know you talk to her before she leaves. And she lives wherever she lives outside the state of Maryland. And you cannot contact her. And the neighbor says, yes, I still see her car there, but she's not answering the door. What do you do? How do you enforce a welfare check for a loved one who happens to live outside of this state? I'd like for you to all, as legislators here, and you are here and we're blessed to have you. Thank you for your service to all of your constituencies across this state. But this is why we ask you to be here, to put forth laws and legislation in place to assist us. And that's what we're asking you to do with this particular legislation. And I pray that you, as you go into your caucus and discuss this bill, will vote yes in support of it. Because today we're talking about Delegate Wood's son. Tomorrow we could be talking about one of your loved ones who was rejected because they did not have a request. Thank you again for your time.
Good evening, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Sheriff John Card. I'm the Sheriff of Prince George's County. I'm here asking for a favorable report in reference to Senate Bill 190. As we talked, and I know it's been an emotional night, we talked about what we can actually do to serve our community. You know, we've asked for, you know, us to actually take action in tragedy. And when we look at something as a welfare check and we think it's so simple and so basic, we start to understand that different jurisdictions and different agencies have different policies and procedures in how they act. I think in actually having a favorable report on this bill would actually make sure that throughout the state, we take this as a serious offense. If you are going through as a family member, not being able to know where your loved one may be and knowing that they should be in a certain area and unable to reach them, and you dial 911 and you're getting additional response of, well, what is the emergency? What do you need? Is it fire? Is it police? What do you need? And time is starting to lapse. What do you do? Especially when you're talking about different state. I think in this bill, when we deal with other jurisdictions as far as outside of the state, making a telephone call is the least thing that we can do to actually call a jurisdiction in another state to say, hey, could you do a welfare check at this address? When we are here, whether it be Prince George's County, Calvert County, Charles County, whatever it may be, I think it's reasonable enough for law enforcement when we get valuable information about a loved one and that there may be some concern in reference to their health care or reference to their well-being, that we should take that as a serious call for service. So with that being said, I'm asking for this favorable report because this is something that, one, can unite the agencies and can allow us to do a better job in serving our citizens. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions from the committee? We have Senator Sidnor.
Thank you very much, and Delegate, I'm sorry I didn't know this story, but the discussion brings out I have some curiosity that I was hoping that you all might be able to help inform me. And my questions don't have anything to do about specifically about, but it's about these wellness checks. Yesterday, we had a presentation that was given to us talking about crime in the state of Maryland. And one of the statistics that was noted was that 60% of violent crimes go unresolved in the state. And so one of the things that I talked about yesterday was just trying to reimagine policing. And I'm wondering, given your background, you said you were your social work background, and again, nothing about this bill, but about wellness checks. Do you, from what you know about it, is this something that law enforcement has to do? Is it could a social worker do it better than law enforcement? I mean, what is your opinion?
So to answer your question, law enforcement would still have to be involved.
Okay.
Okay. The reason law enforcement would have to be involved is, for one example, with my son's situation, his apartment complex is not going to open the door for a social worker.
Okay.
Unless an officer says, we have concern. And I'm being hypothetical because I don't know, I can't speak. Right. I can't speak for Richmond, but I do know that in a lot of situations, there has to be an approval, a nod from law enforcement. In my own work, I actually call the law enforcement myself. So my job is not to go through, I don't send a social worker. I do not send a social worker. I'm a licensed social worker and I send social workers out, but I don't send a social worker in what could be a life-threatening situation without law enforcement.
Got you. Thank you.
Okay.
I appreciate that.
Let me just interject as well. In certain cases, you're talking about from a law enforcement perspective, you get on scene, you look through windows, you look through, and what happens when you do see an individual that's on the floor, incapacitated? You're now looking at forcible entry. At that moment in time, you wouldn't want a social worker to be kicking in somebody's doors and walking into a situation where you don't know who else may be in that apartment or into that residence. So therefore, you would want to have law enforcement response to, one, secure and make sure that, hey, if it was a crime scene, that evidence can be preserved.
Gotcha.
Also, you want to make sure that, hey, they can secure that scene just in case somebody else happened to be there.
And a uniform helps a whole lot in those circumstances.
It really does, yes.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This question is for Delegate Woods. If this bill was to pass, do you think this would have truly saved your son?
I absolutely positively believe it would have saved my son's life.
Okay, that's the only question I have.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The bill is no doubt very well intentioned. I do have some questions about it. It's a very short bill. For example, qualified request means a written request. It doesn't say by who. Does this mean anybody could make a written request and the police would have to respond? Suppose it's a busybody neighbor who notes frequently that nobody's been going in and out of that house and calls every other day and wants a wellness check.
That's different from somebody who knows the person.
I think, first of all, yes, I would ask if we could look at some ways of tweaking this, but what it would then mean is that anyone can't just call in about somebody. You have to show that you are a relative, that you have a real concern about the well-being of that person, rather than calling and being told, I'm sorry, it's another jurisdiction, nothing we can do, and then calling that jurisdiction and having them to say, unless law enforcement makes the call from your area, there's nothing that we can do, even though it's in their jurisdiction. So whatever we can do, if you wanted to make that definition a little more specific, I'm willing to work with you on that.
Okay, great. So I'm just trying to call your attention to the fact that I think maybe some tweaking needs to be done here.
I'll work with you.
So next question is, wellness check is not very well defined. It's just a visit. So if, and I guess my question is an ordinary police officer qualified to make such a visit and make some kind of a medical diagnosis of something that might be wrong inside the house?
So I think it's the language that you're hearing. So when we get dispatched, it'll be a check on the welfare. And that may be for an individual who, like, as you said before, they haven't gone back and forth into the residence. You think there may be an issue. Our response to that scene would actually be go there, we'll knock on the door, we'll try to encounter somebody. We'll see from what we can see, is there an issue or problem? Of course, if there's an additional diagnosis where a person seems to be off, there are better professionals to actually address and handle that. And that's where, at least I know in Prince George's County, we have mobile crisis units that can actually come out if it is a mental health issue or problem. But it really is just to go actually interact with that individual so that we could notify that loved one that this individual is okay.
So maybe some more definition of what a wellness check means would be helpful in the bill. And then the last question I have, Sheriff, I guess it really is more for you.
Can I respond to that first though? Is
Yeah,
that
sure.
okay?
Yeah.
So in the bill, it specifically says a qualified request means a verbal or written request that includes sufficient information regarding a specific life-threatening concern for immediate action or response. So that means that the person has to articulate, as I did, there's a medical emergency. As someone else mentioned that, my mother is a fully functional person. She's not where she's supposed to be, but her car is still in the yard. She's not answering the door. She's not answering the telephone. So these are specific things that a person is supposed to be able to provide. As I also presented, that my son has never missed work and made a no call or no show. That is a specific request. And that's what the bill is very careful to say, that it has to be specific, life-threatening to say, yes, this sounds like it is a potential emergency or a potential fatality, which my son's turned into.
Okay, thank you for that. Sheriff, my last question, I guess really is directed to you. There have been instances when police have arrived at a home unannounced, maybe at night, and with totally innocent motives, but all of a sudden gunfire erupts from inside the house. Aren't you at all concerned that if you have to go out on these calls, because the law would require you to go out, that the officer who went out to knock on the door unannounced might be in some danger?
Unfortunately, I would say a lot of times we do that on a consistent and day-to-day basis. So at the sheriff's office, a lot of our stuff is court ordered. We're not dispatched to that location. We are actually going to that door, knocking on the door without that individual, that resident's understanding or knowing that we're there at that residence. So I think that goes with the nature of the job in which we do and which we serve. I do want to make sure, and I know a lot of law enforcement, we train to make sure that when you do go to these addresses that you are visible, that you do actually make, calls, or you try to make sure that you actually notifying not only just the individuals in that house, but you really want to have the neighbors and everybody to say, well, hey, I heard them yell out police, or I heard them yell out sheriff, so that the neighborhood and people can understand that, hey, this is a law enforcement professional actually trying to engage with this address. And a lot of times, as we start to knock on doors and we call out, you'll be surprised, as you say, that nosy neighbor, a person may come out and provide additional information. Yes. Well, hey, if that vehicle was there, that means they're in the house. They just not coming to the door. That gives us an indication that, hey, there may be something else to this. We also take serious the fact that if we make forcible entry, we have guidelines, because you don't want somebody to be asleep and have actually taken medication and still okay. And then we're kicking in the door going in to say, hey, we got a call saying that you weren't okay. So there's certain ideas, or there's certain policies and procedures in which we actually already have set in place for that.
Yeah, I'm just concerned that a situation we're trying to solve a problem with this bill.
Yes.
But the bill could inadvertently create problems if someone's high on drugs in a house and in pitch black dark, a policeman comes to the front door and yells police, you could precipitate a situation in which someone gets hurt.
I understand. You're concerned about escalation. Is that what it is?
This would have to be done with great care.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you all. I am sorry I was out of the room, and I'm very sorry for your loss. So I really respect that. Yeah, I have a question for any one of you, but just following up on my colleague. I'm wondering if life-threatening, I'm not trying to micromanage, but I don't want any call to go undealt with if somebody misinterprets life-threatening. And sometimes you hear things like life-threatening or risk of severe bodily harm or illness, like you don't think your relative's about to die. I'm so sorry about that. But let's say your elderly mother has cognitive issues, and now you think she's probably very confused. You don't think she's just died, but you do think she's confused. And so I just throw that out. I would really defer to the experts on whether life-threatening would in any way be an obstacle, and it has to be a little bit broader with like high risk of severe injury or illness. But again, I throw that out for you to cogitate on with experts. And I feel like the law enforcement people are very familiar with this term wellness check. So it sounds like they already do some wellness checks, but you're trying to kind of codify and make better the process, maybe make it, I guess it's a little discretionary now. Law enforcement.
Very much so.
All right,
They
we'll do a
can very well
wellness.
just say no.
But you want,
and it's from jurisdiction, it varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and this would help it to be a uniform approach. And again, they have each district, I know we do, each jurisdiction, we do in Prince George's County. They understand what the wellness checks, when they're going to go out, what they need to do when they get there, because it's something that they do all the time. And since they're the ones who are implementing it, I've asked them as well if they have any tweaks to do to help this.
No, I think it's very valuable, and I understand the intent. I support it. So as long as law enforcement across the state, maybe can anybody address it? Just I want to make sure wellness check is just because we're going to codify this. Is it common parlance? The Harford County Sheriff will know it. The Bel Air Town Police will know wellness check. That nobody could slough off or say, "Oh, I didn't. This isn't for us. We don't understand that. We don't do this."
Wellness check is similar, because what we would get dispatched, and no matter where you are throughout the state, it's always going to be a check on the welfare call. So dispatch will always send out, hey, whatever your units may be, it'd be check on the welfare.
Okay, so as long as that's crystal clear in the bill, again, think about whether we could make
Okay.
darn sure. I just do not want to hear someone in another jurisdiction. You all are very experienced. You probably deal with more of them than we do. I don't want anybody in law enforcement. You know, some towns are small and they have small
Yes.
law, or even our counties, a fraction of the size of your county. I don't want anybody to not understand the mandate that we are about to make.
Yeah.
And I don't want them to get caught up in any terminology that they didn't think was applicable to them. So,
Yes.
but thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you.
No, thanks. First, I say, Delegate Woods, thank you very much for bringing this, and Senator, thank you for bringing it. And thank you for sharing your story and for bringing it. It takes a lot to talk about that. So just appreciate you doing that. And there are more delegates in the House right now than there are
Yes, I wanted to
senators.
mention them if I could.
So you got some support.
Yes.
You got, it's like a mutiny over here. But they're here to support you. I know.
And Mr. Chairman, in fact, all of them were coming over, but they did not want to shut down the House.
Yeah, that's what I
They
figured.
were
I was
all
like, oh,
coming
man.
over. We have a delegate, Veronica Turner, who is right here. She's a part of our 26th district team, and Chris Valderrama, who had to leave.
Yes, I saw her.
All of us together, they make up the wonderful 26th district team, Legislative Black Caucus, and the delegates who else, Chair?
You got Chair of the Black
Chair of the
Caucus.
Black
Yeah.
We have Karen Toll.
Hi, we've been
Delegate
texting.
Toll, Delegate Austin, Delegate Martinez.
I appreciate it. No, look, I think Senator James brings up some good points, but for the definition of qualified request, like I think we have to massage that definition and who's qualified to make it. What does that actually mean? Also, the statute doesn't have a time frame for response. And does that open the door for potential liability if you don't respond in a certain amount of time for the jurisdiction? Is there a uniform definition of wellness check? Maybe you've answered that question for 24 jurisdictions in Maryland, but under your scenario, Delegate Woods, your son was out of state. And so if you're making that request, does that conform or comport with out of state definitions?
So, yes, and again, I told you I am a licensed social worker. I have had to make out of state welfare requests. And I want to make it very clear that Richmond, Virginia was happy to do it. The only holdup was not getting the permission from my local police department
to go ahead and contact
to go ahead and say that it was a reputable request. They had no questions with doing it immediately. As a matter of fact, when the detective called me, he was like, "It makes no sense to us." He said, "We do at least 33 of these a day. We get them, we go out, we understand."
And for the individuals that would be like for the definition of qualified request,
Yes,
who is, I guess we'd have to think about who is qualified to make the qualified request.
The person who has very good knowledge or historical information, who is a good historian for the person that they're making a request on the behalf of. That could be a neighbor. When a neighbor knows that somebody gets up and goes to work every day and they haven't gotten up and go to work. They saw them go in the house and they haven't seen them since. That could be a qualified request. And I actually had and this is not in Maryland, but it happened to me with my cousin. I had a cousin in New York and the neighbor made the request and he was deceased also. So a qualified person is just a person who is a good historian who will be able to provide, as I had to do with Prince George's County Police Department. They asked me a whole list of questions about my son. And as I said, when I hung up the telephone, I thought I had given sufficient information. And then I was told when they came hours later to my house that the second part of their protocol is they had to come see me face to face. Nobody told me that during the first part. I would go to the police station. They told me, but it was hours later when they came. I don't get that, and all of it, Chair, has to do with the fact that I lived outside of the state of Virginia. That was it.
So definition is more elastic than I would have thought, because I thought it had to be like a guardian or familial connection or legal connection. But a historian, that parlance, we're not familiar with the parlance, so I have to look into that. The historian, that was good. I mean, that's a common use, that's vernacular that's used in your profession. But
yes, sir.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Further questions from the committee? All right, Senator, thank you very much. Delegate,
thank you. Urgent favorable report, and thank you for your patience after such a long day.
Excellent. Thank you, Delegate. Thank you very much. Good to see you. All right, so that concludes the testimony for the proponents of the bill. We now have oh, he did? Okay. Oh, did I raise? Okay, got it.
Some of those, I think, have already been
Okay. Same issue. Excellent. Okay. So then we've got one more witness joining us virtually. Ms. Levy, how are you? Good to see you again. When we started, the windows in your background were light. It's now dark outside. We've been here for a long time. All right. Go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. While the government gives the legislature, Debbie Levy from the Office of the Public Defender, while the government gives the legislature the power to make laws, that power is not unbridled, and laws must conform to the Constitution, even with proposals such as this one that are very well intentioned. The legislature's tasked with identifying problems and coming up with solutions, and undoubtedly the legislators are seeking to remedy a problem with this bill. But unfortunately, this bill may create more problems than it aims to address. Namely, it fails to sufficiently define qualified requests. It fails to place limitations on what officers can do in their community caretaking function or proclaim what they cannot. And finally, it creates a mandatory interaction between law enforcement and vulnerable persons without any requirement that trained mental health providers be involved. In no uncertain terms, in Coniglia versus Strom, 593 U.S. 194, 2021, the United States Supreme Court unanimously held that the community caretaking function of police officers may not be used to make a warrantless entry into the home. This bill demands a response from law enforcement on a non-criminal matter under the community caretaking doctrine, and it makes that response mandatory, but it doesn't appropriately draw the boundaries around that, what that response will look like, and when and how it would end. With the knowledge as recent as 2021 that the Supreme Court rejects any notion that this community caretaking function could serve as the basis to enter a home, it seems that this legislation may inadvertently conflict with the law or at best underinform the public and law enforcement by failing to recognize this important line in the sand. I know the law is well-intentioned, but the community caretaking function and the wellness check doctrine would not probably solve the problems that are on the floor tonight. And there are other ways to go about it that would conform with the law and not violate, unfortunately, like Senator West said, citizens' rights when there's somebody who might be making the request who's not qualified. And that we would urge most respectfully, and I understand I'm a mother, and I do most respectfully, for those reasons specifically, just urge an unfavorable report for 190, but I do express my deep condolences.
Hey, thanks a lot, Ms. Levy. Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thanks a lot. Good to see you again. And with that, that'll conclude the hearing for Senate Bill 190 and our hearings for the day.